very much. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tacoma Park City Council meeting for this evening. I'd like to call us to order and ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Mayor Stewart,
Here.
Councilmember Kovar,
Here.
Councilmember Duvalla,
Present.
Councilmember Costick,
Here.
Councilmember Siemens,
Present.
Councilmember Smith,
Here.
Councilmember Searcy.
Here.
Thank you. There are no changes to our agenda this evening. Upcoming agenda, we have our meeting next week, and we will start off with a proclamation of the BB Moore National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. And I will mention this next week, but I want to thank Ms. Mary Jane Machui for raising awareness of the Awareness Month to me when we were talking last week. And next we have our voting session next week, which will include a resolution authorizing submittal of MML legislative action request, a resolution regarding continuation of Laurel Avenue streetery, a second reading ordinance approving the FY 2022 budget amendment number 1, second reading ordinance approving FY 2022 stormwater budget amendment number 1, and the second reading ordinance amending the Tacoma Park Code regarding purchasing and taxation. And then we'll have a consent agenda next week, which will include a single reading ordinance approving a contract for sports officiating services, a resolution providing for appointments to our youth council, and a resolution providing for the city council summer recess. And we will have then a continuing discussion work session on amending the code regarding city committees. Then the city council will adjourn until September 8th, and that will be our next official meeting will be on September 8th. Our hopes, if all goes well over the next few months, is that that will be an in-person meeting, and before our official meeting at 7:30 p.m., we will have a reception for our incoming city manager, Jamal Fox. So please look for information about that later in the month of August. In addition, while the council is on recess, there are still lots of things that happen in the city. And one of them is National Night Out, which will be on August 3rd on Maple Avenue. I believe I'm checking with the acting city manager. It's still going to be in front of Piney Branch Elementary.
That's correct.
Right. All right. That is all the agenda items. I see. Is Ms. Block with us or no?
She nods. Wait a minute. No, I don't see her yet. Maybe.
Okay. Why don't we then? So there were no other. Ms. Block signed up for commenting on the purchasing code, and if she joins us, we will go to her. But why don't we then move to general public comments? And the first one is Mr. Arthur David Olson.
David Olson, Herbie Hancock Avenue. I travel in Quaker circles where there are strict term limits, and I'm aware of the historical and theological reasons Quakers have them. I have not yet heard why they're a good idea for the city's volunteer committees. I don't believe they should be put in place without an explanation of why it's being done. I'm particularly worried about term limits and equity. The council is about to start recruiting to improve the diversity and representativeness of city committees. That work may be undone if recruits are forced off committees in 6 years by term limits. And I can't help but wonder, if term limits are a good idea for volunteer committees, why aren't they a good idea for the council itself? In the past, I've heard the idea that council term limits aren't needed because they already exist in the form of elections. If that's true, it's also true that committee term limits aren't needed because they already exist in the form of reappointments. I hope the council will remove term limit provisions from the proposed changes on committees to be voted on next week. I also hope the council will limit to one non-automatically renewed year the extension of the closure of Laurel Avenue. If the long-term nature of the street is to be changed, I hope there will be a study of options before the city makes a commitment. Converting the street to a park, charging fees for use of the street, and selling the street are all possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Next, we'll go to Mr. Chris Brown.
Thanks for having me on. So I wanted to comment on the use of the streetery. I own Tacoma Beverage Company, and the closure of the streetery is what got us through the pandemic last year. Without it, it would have been a really tough year. And having those 8 seats outside with no seating inside and carry out only kind of enabled us to get through and keep our employees on staff and really helped us out as a business. And then I took some data from just the past few months since March. And so now that vaccines are more prominent and people are able to come out and feel a little bit more comfortable going to restaurants, our sales have gone up dramatically, and a lot of that is due to the streetery. And so just since March, we've done 15,000 orders in our 8-seat streetery. So 15,000 families or individuals have come and sat in our 8 seats and have had dinner or lunch or a coffee or whatever and have enjoyed that. And with that is 34,000 items. So 34,000 things have been purchased from Tacoma Beverage Company and enjoyed just on our 8 seats, not in the whole streetery, just on our 8 seats since March. And since then, we currently have four full-time staff members that work in the streetery just for our 8 seats. And then we also have some employees that also wipe down tables and sweep up napkins and chopsticks, wrappers, and whatever other trash kind of gets strewn about the streetery. We have them go out in the morning before we open, and they kind of clean that up. And so with the streetery open, it employs full-time 4 employees, 21 shifts per week. And then in addition to that, so the data through our POS is only for our 8 tables that I can tell exactly what's been being sold. But in addition, over half of our sales are carryout from people that come in and order something at the POS and then carry it out for takeaway. And a good number of those people will sit in the streetery and get on their computer or have a meeting, or the city had 3 of the picnic tables painted, and they're amazing, and a lot of people enjoy those throughout the day. And I'm sure if any of you have been out to the streetery, it's packed on a daily basis from 8 a.m. It's packed right now. I just came in from out there, and I was thinking I should do a live shot from the streetery, but came down to the office because of noise reasons. But it's been huge for our company, and it's really enjoyed, and we hear every day how much people enjoy it, and really hope that it stays open.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brown. Next, I'll have to see, are we going to Miss Barkley or Julie Body?
Ms. Barkley has not joined us, but Julie Bodie, oh, here she is. All right.
Good.
Laura Barkley's here.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. The Old Tacoma, I'm Laura Barclay, representing the Old Tacoma Business Association, and I'd like to read a statement. The Old Tacoma Business Association would like to express its continued support for the ongoing closure of the business side of Laurel Avenue. The streetery has allowed our local businesses, as Chris mentioned, to keep staff employed and serving customers throughout the pandemic. This space not only benefits the businesses located on the block and across the street from Laurel, but the businesses all over our commercial district. Our fitness studios hosted weekly classes under the tent when there were still capacity limitations in place, and informal trash studies have shown takeout packaging from businesses throughout the commercial district. The streetery has also provided a positive community impact by providing safe outdoor meeting space when indoor dining and home visits were not recommended, and continues to provide a safe place for those still not comfortable meeting inside with increasing cases and a dominant variant. I'd like to highlight the energy the streetery brings to the commercial district. The new public art is engaging, the seating is regularly filled, and there are always pedestrians on the block. And this activity makes the commercial district look fun, busy, and inviting. I also want to raise the point of the streetery as a transformative placemaking project that has made our commercial district more competitive. Ellsworth and Silver Spring, the proposed Village of Village Green of Walter Reed, and the ongoing investment that's going into both of these locations creates more of a need for Takoma Park to evolve itself and use opportunities like this to remain competitive in the DC market and to attract visitors. We would even encourage that the city look at infrastructure modifications that would enhance pedestrian and recreational use of the space. Lastly, I'd like to use this opportunity to express our support for the Takoma Park Farmers Market and highlight its role during the pandemic as a safe space for shopping and as a location where an increased number of families use their federal and state nutrition benefits. The market has been mostly on Laurel Ave for its 38 years in the city. The market has appreciated the use of the parking lot as an alternative to Laurel Avenue during the pandemic, and if Laurel Avenue remains closed, would be agreeable to remaining in this lot. The property owner is also prepared to extend the lease. I do need to highlight the significant increase in rent that the market pays to lease this private lot over the rent they would pay to the city to remain on Laurel Ave. With an extended closure, we look to the city of Takoma Park for grant opportunities to mitigate this difference. In closing, we ask that you vote for the continued closure of Laurel Avenue and help identify grant opportunities for the Takoma Park Farmers Market. I also sent along a video of the space on a busy Sunday morning that the city was gonna show. Thanks. I just sent it along just to show how active it is on a Sunday morning. As Chris expressed tonight, busy as ever. All the spaces are always filled. I just think people like to come and spend time there now that it's been set up. So we hope that it will continue.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us this evening. All right. Next on public comments, I'll turn over. Julie, are you ready? I think you're still on mute.
There we go. Thanks. I'd like to turn our attention for a bit to council commitment and continuity. I'm a downwinder and a very fortunate one. As a member of the Takoma Park Nuclear Free Committee, who's able to try my best to see that my taxes and our taxes stop supporting the infinite pain and misery caused by nuclear weapons. Tonight, that means urging you to follow the goals the council set in 2017 after the finely researched presentation by the late Kay Tucker, and followed by comments by council members, 3 or 4 of whom are still on the committee. On the mayor's summary, that it was unanimously appreciated, and her subsequent offer to keep us in the loop. Those were my words, but she thought they were good ones, and give us schedules and updates so we'd know how the city was doing with its efforts to disengage from banking and financial practices that supported nuclear weapons. So we're still waiting. And we'd especially on updates, and we're interested in the city's current financial holdings, how they've changed over those, do the math for me, over those 5, 6 years. Instead of the open democracy, can I read this? I can, but I'm wondering what happened. What happened between then and then it was renewed last year, the council's support for nuclear-free finances and sustainable finances, because that's what it's all about anyway. The same banks that support nuclear weapons support pipelines and all of that. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing from you.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. And I noticed that Ms. Block has joined us, so I think this is perfect timing since we are at the end of other folks who signed up for public comment. So Ms. Block, if you I know you signed up on the voting item on purchasing code and general public comments, so you have up to 6 minutes. We'll just do it all at once.
Great. I hope it won't be that long. So thank you, everyone. Nadine Block, Ward 3. I have 3 little comments I want to make today. One is that I really want to register my concern and my about raising the lack of oversight, if you will, on spending bills to 50,000. It seems like too big a jump, especially given the fact that we're having a new city manager come in from what is obviously too low from right now. I don't think we need to be a leader in this metric, actually, with a city council that has so little oversight that it seems ridiculous. So I would advocate and request that the city council not vote to approve the 50K budgeting without oversight from the city council. That's number one. Number two, I really want to speak for a transformative approach to the ARPA money. We have $8 million just for starters and another 8 million or so coming in. I really think it's important that you all take this opportunity to walk our talk in Takoma Park and be progressive. Let's actually help people. We're still in this pandemic. We have an incredible increase in infections happening all around us. We are doing pretty well here right at this moment, but the Delta variant and others are going to come, and we need to deal with it. And we still have a lot of residents who are really suffering from the fallout of lack of work and lack of being able to send their kids to school and all kinds of things. So let's spend that money. Whether you use Wayne's idea of just distributing $1,000 to each person who qualifies under a certain metric, or whether we do something else more courageous that is not that, I really encourage you to think about that and dig deep into your heart and soul and to just use that money now. Don't stash it away. We have people in our community that need it. There are still incredible lines for people who need food and other support. That's the second comment. And the third one is kind of very personal, actually, for you all, city council members. I thank the city council for taking a stand on the cell towers, the ZTA 1907. And as you probably know, There's a few people in the Montgomery County Council trying to ram through a decision before they take a break. And that is really just a gift to the industry. There's no reason to do this, and especially given the timing of an imminent court decision that we expect. So what we need, I know Tacoma Park can pass a resolution and force a supermajority. I know that hasn't happened. I know you did write a letter in support, and we're supporting the amicus brief before. So please, individually, you could make a statement and encourage this county council not to vote on this before they go on break. There is no reason to vote before they come back in September, especially since we probably will have a court decision on the science, which is what everybody's crying about, before September, and there's no reason to vote on it now. So those are my 3 little points. We don't need to be a leader in this $50,000 budgeting metric. We should be courageous in distributing the ARPA money to people in our community that need it immediately. And please do take action so that this county council doesn't overrule our sovereignty in this case of siting of cell phone towers, which will have an impact on all renters and all homeowners in this city. Thanks very much. Have a good break.
Great. Now we will move on to council comments. Any council comments this evening? Councilman Costick.
Thank you. I wanted to give an update on the Transportation Planning Board meeting and vote today, which probably many of you have seen. Not particularly good news. Today, the Transportation Planning Board took up the kind of a revote on the decision that was made a month ago, where we removed the MDOT 270 project from the long range plan. And MDOT and a number of jurisdictions requested a reconsideration with some new information that they had shared since then. And so we took another vote today. And unfortunately, that vote was not successful in terms of removing the project. So I will say there's been an incredible amount of engagement throughout the region on this. The Transportation Planning Board, which usually gets maybe 5 to 7 maximum comments and letters submitted, had 563 total comments submitted to it for the public record. And I think each of us individually on the board received more than 1,000 emails about this. So there were on people from various perspectives. So there's been an incredible amount of engagement, and I think it has been a positive opportunity to have a discussion about this. Unfortunately, we did take the vote today. It was a vote to add the project back in, and there were 28 votes in favor of adding the project back, 10, including myself, who voted against doing so. And we use kind of a complicated weighted voting system based on population. And that voting system was 10.6 to 4.3 on the vote. So unfortunately, that project is back in the long range plan. We do still have some positive aspects related to the long range plan in terms of the aspirational initiatives that are in there. And we'll have a final vote on the actual plan itself after we get the air quality conformity analysis back next year. So this isn't final, but it definitely is a setback in terms of removing that project and some of the aspirations of the board. And I want to thank all of you and many residents I heard from in Tacoma Park who strongly supported removing the project. And it was really great to hear from you all, and really great to have the kind of support that Tacoma Park has for climate change, addressing climate change and equity and safety and all of the things that we value. And I also just want to thank a number of the other jurisdictions who did vote against the project as well. So that's an update from TPB today. 2 other quick things. I've been hearing from a number of residents on stormwater with a lot of questions, and I spoke briefly with Daryl Braithwaite from Public Works today and got some information from her, and I think she is planning on sending out a summary with some more detailed information about the work she's been doing with people who have had appeals or concerns. And I think she was also going to be talking with the county about their correction process for property lines that are not correct. So if anyone has questions about that or concerns, I really urge you to contact Public Works and start that process and discussion with her. And then finally, just want to give a shout out to the Recreation Department for the ongoing camps that are appear to be going great. I personally have had the opportunity to observe them through my 2 children who are taking part in one of the camps this week. And it's been a lot of fun, and I've gotten to hear a lot of great stories about the activities that they're doing. So thank you very much to the Rec Department for that. And that's it.
Great, thank you. Councilman Searcy.
Well, I want to thank Councilmember Costick for fighting the good fight. So,
Mhm.
so much for all of the time and effort that you put in. So I want to give a huge shout out to the Crossroads Food Network. Today at the farmers market, not only do we have awesome vendors, but we also have a vaccination clinic that was going on. So they worked with the La Clínica del Pueblo and Luminous Health to offer vaccines. And there were a number of people there that were getting vaccinated today. And so that was a joy to see, and definitely another example of how building partnerships like this is a great way to get hard to reach populations to get vaccinated. So people brought their kids out while they were getting vaccinated outside, and then they went and got their fruits and vegetables for the day, and then they went on about their way. So definitely appreciate. And also I know our deputy or acting city manager was also a part of some of that planning. So just want to thank all of you all for doing it, and to be able to see firsthand how many people were being vaccinated as a result of that effort was really, really great. And I also want to thank Daryl Braithwaite. I mean, there's been a lot of work happening in the street resurfacing, speed humps put in, stripping, all of that stuff. So we had a speed bump to go in on the 8,000 block of Wildwood today. And I know that there's a number of other things that are happening across Ward 6, and just want to send my appreciation to DPW for all of the work that they're doing, managing all of the road work that's happening right now. And that's all I have. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor. And I also want to express my appreciation for Councilmember Costick's vote. And I understand it's a disappointment, but I think it's important to try to do the right thing. And I do think a few maybe more modest commitments around transit ended up being at least pledged by the state as a result of the initial vote. So I don't want to equate the two in any way, but I don't think it was an effort that wasn't, it was an effort that was worth it in every way anyway, even though the result is not what we wanted. So appreciation for that. Just a few other things. One, there's been an ongoing issue involving the timing and the sounds from the new installation of traffic lights at the intersection of Piney Branch and Eastern. And that's actually in the District of Columbia, but it affects the people who live around there. So I appreciate that for our new neighboring council member in the district, Janice Lewis George did send over a member of her staff and someone from DOT to take a look at that, DOT, and I think they're going to get that worked out. So I appreciate that, and good cooperation that we like to see across the border. On the cell towers, which was mentioned previously, I wasn't able to watch the county council live, but I watched the video of their proceedings afterwards, and there were efforts with several amendments to either have a tiered approach so that in certain circumstances, depending upon the size and type of street, there could be greater setbacks and or some heightened permitting procedures that could have enabled residents in the community to have more say in where the small towers would potentially be located. Most of those and none of the really important ones were approved, and this was just an amendment process, and they're going to vote next week. So I do think it's important for us to weigh in. I would suggest that we could send another letter asking the county council to hold off or expressing our views on that, and I'll take that up separately with my colleagues. I heard from a few people about the conditions at Bell Ziegler Park, and I do want to ask staff if they could take a look at that. And in particular, I know there was a concern about the condition of the swing set, and I understand Public Works is going to go out and check that out quickly. So I think that's important, and that'll get done. But I think if we could get a sense for, in terms of the quality of the grass and so on, when that can be looked at, I'd appreciate it. Two other things on stormwater, which one of my colleagues mentioned. A resident mentioned this idea, and I don't recall that we got into it deeply when we were looking at the stormwater process previously. Really, over the last 2 years, we talked about it a lot. But in a few cases, there are low-income people who, because of the nature of their properties, are in the category that are seeing a big jump, potentially up to the maximum capped amount. And so I don't know whether we would have the ability to have some sort of credit for people in that situation too, particularly if they're in the category that already receive credits on their property tax. So that's something I think we ought to take a look at. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, and we'll get into more of this when we talk about the budget amendment and ARPA later this evening, but I did receive a letter, and I think others on the council probably did as well, from a group of residents who are involved with the Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church, and they were advocating for equity consideration in our work around the ARPA funds. And there were, I think, 5 key points they raised, including more outreach on vaccines, addressing evictions, preserving affordable and safe housing, food justice, and reimagining public safety. And so some of those things we're already working on, of course, reimagining public safety. A lot of those issues, there's a question of how best to do it in terms of the county versus us. And we're obviously trying to cooperate with the county. We do have already in the pending budget amendment funding for an initial round of funding to try to address eviction. And we've been talking about adding some to address food and nutrition. So I think I agree with all those priorities and the challenges figuring out how best to do it. But I'm hoping that we'll be able to add some more on food and nutrition, at least as we go forward, and we can talk about that later. But I just wanted to acknowledge that important letter, which was signed by people from a number of different places in the city. Thank you.
Okay. I have a couple of public comments this evening. Council comments this evening. I also want to thank Crossroads for a great job today. It was a great day at the market. Glad to see so many folks vaccinated. I was going to mention, as Councilmember Kovar did, the letter we did receive from the group at the Presbyterian Church. And I have a request for the acting city manager. I don't know if it's possible next week, but I would like to put it on a list to have an update on September 8th about the pilot program on ambassadors or navigators, whatever we decided to actually call them. Our vaccination rates in the city right now are at fully vaccinated residents are at 71.7%. So that's a pretty good rate, but we need to make sure that we are reaching everyone to get vaccinated. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to reach some of the harder to reach members of our community is moving forward with this ambassador or navigator program that we've talked about. So if we can't get an update by next week, I would like one on the agenda for September 8th. In addition, as we're talking about ARPA funds, I know one of the public comments tonight talked about the idea of providing people, everyone in the city, a certain amount, a check. I like to say that's actually something I am on the Mayor's for Guaranteed Income. It's an organization that was started by Mayor Michael Stubbs, who had been the mayor of Stockton, California. And they've done research on guaranteed income and showing that when you provide people with a certain amount of income that they know they're getting in addition to what they receive through their salaries, it has a great deal of benefits for them. This is actually something that I mentioned to our incoming city manager for August, and we discussed it as something that I would like us to look into regarding our use of ARPA funds. So I just want to acknowledge and thank the residents for raising that. I'm also happy to share the research that's been done in a number of cities around the country on guaranteed income. The results have been really terrific on that. So looking forward to that in the fall as well. This week, I represented the City Council in front of the County Council to provide testimony on the BEPS, the Building Energy, Councilman Devala, what does it stand for? The benchmarks for
Performance.
Thank you. Performance standards. I forgot what the P stood for. And thank you to Councilman Devala and our sustainability manager for the assistance in the testimony. But I did do that yesterday. On Friday and Saturday, I will be at the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments board meeting. Those 2 days, there'll be a meeting in person. So I'm glad to be able to see colleagues again from around the region. I do want to also thank Councilwoman Kostick for her work on the Transportation Planning Board. And I know a number of us have thanked her, but it's great to get a text message from the County Council President in the afternoon saying what a wonderful job a colleague is doing in a very tough meeting. So many people regionally were watching, and thank you for the work you did today. And then finally, I also do want to thank Ms. Braithwaite, like others have, for her work in Public Works. And I do know many people are anxious to have some questions answered on the stormwater fee. And I know the staff is putting together information on that to provide to us. And they are talking to folks at the county level. So I just thank them for that work and look forward to getting more information. That is it for my comments tonight. And I will turn it over to our acting city manager, Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and good evening, council members and residents watching from home. I wanted to start with some of the exciting summer events we have coming up in the next few weeks. Starting with, as Madam Mayor mentioned, our National Night Out hosted by the Police Department is back. It was canceled last year, so we're so excited to come back even bigger this year. It's coming up on Tuesday, August 3rd from 6 to 9 p.m. and it will be held at the Piney Branch Elementary School. The goal is really to bring the community together to raise awareness about safety and crime prevention, support our local businesses, groups and organizations, and strengthen relationships between the community and our police department, which, as we know, is so important as a part of our Reimagining Public Safety initiative. So we encourage everyone to come out and get to know your neighbors. There's going to be food, ice cream, face painting, moon bounce, dunk tank, games, prizes, karaoke, and a lot more. So it should be a really fun night. We'll also have a lot of our city departments there tabling, as well as some of our county services there tabling to connect people to resources. So really encouraging everyone to come out to that on August 3rd. Our recreation team has been keeping busy. Our summer camps have been running really smoothly. Parents have said they're really appreciative of our check-in process, of our cleanliness and mask wearing protocols. And we've gotten a lot of feedback that kids are really tired when they come home, which is what our recreation team thinks is a very high compliment, that they're wearing the kids out with all the educational activities and fun activities they're doing all day. But registration is actually now open for our traditional before care and after care programs as well. So before the bell and after the bell for this upcoming school year, our staff have been working hard behind the scenes to make sure the building, participants and staff will be safe, and we're following the latest in state and local COVID-19 guidelines. And so, the emphasis will be on fun programs, but also making use of our city facilities before and after school, and registration is being accepted now until filled. And this is the first year that we'll be offering the Before the Bell program at the Recreation Center on New Hampshire Avenue. I know we got a lot of requests for that programming in the past, so we're offering that for the first time this year. Another fun project that you might see around town, our Arts and Humanities Director has finally been able to put poem stamps in our sidewalks. So look under your feet for Poetry by the Street. Again, this was a competitive process where city residents of all ages entered, and 10 adults and 10 kids were selected as winners, and they received a prize. And we've stamped 3 of their poems so far, and we'll be working on that throughout the rest of the summer. So that's up on our website. You can see the pictures of the poetry stamps around town. And this tomorrow, actually, from 6 to 8 p.m., we also have a retirement party at El Golfo for Karen McPherson. She retired after many years of service with the city a couple weeks ago. So we're having a delayed celebration for her. And you can RSVP by calling the library number. Next, from Public Works, as a follow-up for the stormwater fee notice. So we do continue to get questions on that. Our Public Works Director has been working very hard in terms of answering those questions. So we want to encourage people again that if you think there's an error in your impervious area, submit an application for correction, and you'll get a call from our Public Works staff. They'll use the maps and your property survey to walk through your calculation on the phone, and they can also do a site visit if needed. I think, a lot of the requests we've gotten so far have been for our credit program, which will be later in the year. So that's when you might get credit for doing installations like rainwater gardens that are improving your stormwater runoff. But in terms of the impervious area calculations, we haven't gotten that many errors. And for the ones that are actual errors, we've been able to go out to the site and correct those. We also had a meeting with county staff this afternoon, and they were very receptive. We have identified some property line errors that they have acknowledged are errors, and they've agreed to go block by block throughout the entire city, correcting those that we've identified, but also looking to check that there aren't any more. They said that process will take about 2 months, but in the meantime, our request for correction on the Public Works website is the best way to get any corrections. And if we do find that there is a property line correction, we're now in contact with the county GIS staff, and we'll be referring those to them. So we'll continue to update council regularly on this issue. I'll actually be sending out an update from Ms. Braithwaite after this meeting this evening. That'll go into more detail on that. But all of the information is up to date on our stormwater management page, and you can always email or call Public Works for more information. And that is all I have for this evening.
Great, thank you. And particularly thank you for the work on the stormwater feed. Really appreciate that. And glad to hear the county is cooperating. That's awesome. That's terrific. And look forward to receiving that update. All right. Let's get into our meeting agenda for this evening. And we have our first voting item, which is the second reading ordinance awarding a contract for consulting services for redistricting. I don't believe we've had any changes since the first reading, so I'll ask if someone would please move the ordinance. Councilmember Dabala moved, Councilwoman Caustic second. Any comments, questions? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala,
Yes.
Councilmember Caustic,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Terrific. Next, we'll move into our budget amendment. And before I ask if someone would move that, we do have a change to that. I want to ask our acting city manager, and I think Grace Wiggins is with us. Thank you, Ms. Wiggins, to walk through after last week, and Councilmember Kovar and Smith raised questions regarding making sure that we had enough funding as we were on recess to cover issues if they were particularly around food insecurity. I had requested that the staff provide us with an update on what they think is most needed at this time and how we can ensure that, particularly as we are on recess, that they have the resources available to help anyone who is in need in our community. And they've come back to us with a short report. So I think I'll turn it over to Ms. Wiggins and Ms. Clark to give us an update. Thank you very much.
Sure. So thank you, Madam Mayor. Grace and I had several discussions over the past few days, and we also spoke with representatives from the Montgomery County Food Council, just really thinking through kind of what would be the best first investment, again, just to get us to September, where we can take a broader, more holistic look at our ARPA spending plan, but really what would be the most pressing need in terms of food security. And Grace had a great proposal, and so I'll turn it over to her to talk a little bit about what she's proposing, but we think it really is grounded in best practice in terms of food security and in line with the county's approach as well. So Grace, do you want to talk a little about your proposal?
Thank you so much. And good evening. My name is Grace Wiggins. I'm the housing manager for the city of Tacoma Park. And I'm really excited to talk about something that the council has put in place already. So back in 2016, the council established a community partners grant. We call it CP2. And CP2 was really designed to provide an alignment with council priorities and the needs of our community through an RFP that would augment existing need, but not duplicate anything that we're doing here in the city. And so, as you know, we have a limited capacity across the city, and we wanted to create a mechanism to address those needs. And that's what CP2 is designed to do. We just finished the first cycle. It was a very, very long cycle, one granting year and then 4 subsequent renewals. And our standout grantee was the Crossroads, our farmers market on Ann Street. And we're really excited to have gone through that process with them. And so moving forward, just on the food end, I want to talk a little bit about how we want to use CP2 to identify vendors who can help us continue for the full fiscal year issues around food insecurity. And I think what we've learned over the past 16 months is that, number one, there are people that have fallen into desperate need around food. And some of that predated the pandemic, and it was revealed during this 16-month period. But then there were folks who we know in our community and across our country that lost jobs, and food was the one thing that they could not make ends meet around. And so the work of some of our really dedicated providers has really come in at a time where our community and our council, looking at Councilmember Siemens, he has really made us all into weightlifters and bodybuilders, because we're carrying heavy boxes up steps and through buildings. And so through this process, for those who were not on the council at the time that the CP2 program was adopted, it is through an RFP. And we have the framework right now to kind of work around what the current needs are and to get that out. And then once we receive those RFPs, we'll be reviewing those applications. The exciting part about this is, for the very first time, the city of Tacoma Park is making a dedicated commitment with funding to support this work. What comes with that RFP is also tracking and reporting. So for members of the council that are really interested in trying to figure out what the gaps are, we'll be able to do that, because the folks that will be the recipients from that RFP process will be tracking and identifying who they're serving, how they're serving them. And for members of the council and the public that have been involved with filling that need by volunteering, you'll know that many of our sites have been inundated with people coming in. And so the most they can get is household size and zip codes. And for the city of Tacoma Park, that's not always accurate, because as we know, 20912 covers a lot of Montgomery County, as well as parts of Prince George's County. And so we're really going to have the ability to start looking at food in a different way. And we're going to have really engaged partners who want to do the work. And so really looking forward to that. Second part of the proposal around food is to engage a vendor to conduct outreach education and enrollment in the SNAP program, which is formerly known as the food stamp program. That's something that I've wanted to see for a long time. There is, through this federal program, so much more sustainability for our families that are struggling with food. And we'd hope that those who are eligible, especially in light of some of the relaxation around the charge rule, many of our mixed immigrant families will also be looking at the SNAP program as an option for long-term food stability. So I think we're able to do two really exciting things that we haven't done before, and create a brand new model for how we help with food and where we can send people if they want to know more about the SNAP program. So I'll take a breath there because before I talk about kind of the emergency assistance, because I know there may be questions about just the food security piece through the CP2 program.
I see Councilmember Smith has his hand up.
Thank you, Ms. Wiggins, for that intro. Will Adventist Community Services be eligible to apply for this grant funding, even though our colleague is in the council and has a special relationship with them?
Adventist will absolutely be eligible. They are a leading provider of food and other services in our community. And I can't imagine a scenario where they would not be considered. They're a really valuable partner. And what I will also say, in the past year, they've partnered with the Diaper Bank, which has made a tremendous difference for our families with newborns. And as you know, there are a lot of babies that would have gone without Pampers this past 12 to 15 months without the support of Adventist. So I look forward to their application.
I think that's fantastic. I've worked with them in Ward 5, and they've been a fantastic partner. Will the research institute that is connected to Maryland's public policy program, are they going to do something of an analysis on how this grant is being distributed and how effective it will be helping families?
So, we're going to be receiving, if I understand the question correctly, this project will be managed within the housing division of HCD. It's going to be managed directly by Jennifer Hale, who the council is familiar with as our grants manager. And we'll be creating metrics for evaluating the work that's going on. But I just want to emphasize the money that the council is appropriating will be directly used for City of Tacoma Park residents. I think it's going to be really important that anyone applying, any entity applying for these dollars will know that it goes directly to support our residents, even though they may get support from other funding sources.
And the reason I brought it up is because I thought we had talked about at one time bringing them in to look at the need in the community. I just thought that this would be a great opportunity.
I think that's a great suggestion. It's been a difficult 15 months around food. It's been very difficult to figure out where the gaps are. And I think we all kind of see that through the pandemic. Once things settle down a little bit, and hopefully, we won't be impacted by these variants putting us back in masks and away from each other. I think the way any study would work, you really do need to have a baseline. And the past 15 months have not given us a good baseline to determine what real need is. So I will definitely take that into consideration.
And do you and Ms. Clark think about other ways or that we could use some of this ARPA money for this first tranche? Or is it just for the food insecurity.
No. So I think, and I don't want to speak for the acting city manager, but I know from a departmental standpoint, I know the city and our various departments are looking at a strategic way of managing these dollars. And so we want to really be sure that we're doing the right thing for our community. And for this particular issue, food security, the recommendation for $250,000 would go for the full fiscal year. So I'll turn it over to the acting city manager.
Yeah, and Councilman, I just want to emphasize that I think Councilman Kovar's point is well taken, that we want to be thoughtful in terms of how this money is distributed for food security. And it takes a little bit of time to get those mechanisms in place, to get the RFP out and get tracking mechanisms in place. So rather than wait till our September discussion about the broader ARPA strategic plan, we did want to get at least an initial amount in the works so we can get some of those gears in motion and get the money to the organizations that need it. So I think this is a follow-up from our discussion last week.
And I guess my last question would be the moratoria ends at the end of this month on evictions. Do you think that we are going to have enough money to be able to stop and keep people in housing? Because I'm just hearing that all these nightmare scenarios that people are just going to be thrown out left and right.
Yeah. So there are two things. Number one, we're working hard with not only tenants, but we're also working with property owners, especially those property owners who've not received any money in almost 12 to 13 months. And so we've been writing very large checks to stop evictions and bring people to zero. That was a pledge that I made on behalf of the Housing Division back in March of 2020, because we knew that this was going to happen. We've been very fortunate that there have been these moratoriums that have prevented the evictions from and the actual eviction process from moving forward. But we're prepared. We're working not only with CASA and Maryland Legal Aid, but we're also working within the cities. I was going to use a word, but it was wrong. Tacoma Park, Gaithersburg, Germantown, Montgomery County, we're all working together, Rockville, we're all working together to look at these dockets every week to see where default judgments have been entered. We're doing our best. And we're willing to step in, and the county has really upped their game in terms of getting these applications processed. And that's been a big, big help. But keep in mind, the county is only willing to help up to $12,000. In many cases, the city of Tacoma Park is closing the gap and bringing folks to zero. That is a big deal. And we're doing it with late fees and often, with attorney fees, because we don't want anything to prevent our families from remaining where they are. It will be an incredible burden for a family to be rehoused after they lose their housing in this kind of a scenario, because any new landlord will want to know what happened at the old property.
Right.
And, we just don't want to do that. The last thing I'll say, and it's connected to the food as well as the housing. A lot of the work that we're doing, we're looking at households. Our young folks in our elementary, middle school, and high schools will be returning in a month and a half. That will have an impact on food, because there will be in-school instruction, which will be great, because for many of our families, they struggled because many of our our students relied on those meals in school. So school resumes on August the 30th. That's the first day of school for Montgomery County Public Schools. And so, our dollars, by the time the RFP comes back and we're able to evaluate who's applied, it will come at the right time. And again, it will give us a better baseline once we know. But also, we are looking at resolving evictions, especially with families with children. Our young people cannot go back to school in a different home or separated from their siblings or living in a different community. It will absolutely be a hardship that, can't be repaired with money. So what we can do at the front end and what we have been doing is really prioritizing families with young children that are still in our public schools. Not to say that we're not helping everybody, but that's been a major consideration in bringing people to zero.
And can people apply again for money if they still need help paying rent? Or
They
is this
should call, absolutely. They should call 311, whether they have an eviction notice or not. They should get on the list no matter what. And we're advising people to do that. But again, we're catching people at the end. And for many of our families, they have what I've shared with others, serial filings by landlords. So they have an eviction notice for March, April, May, June. And so, they have multiple court dates. It's hard to get to work and stay at work and stay focused when you have a court date. And so where we can step in and just clear the whole balance so that every one of those eviction cases, it comes to a conclusion, that's what we're going to do.
And I just want you to know you have my support to do whatever it takes.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wiggins, I wanted to follow up on just a question that on what Councilmember Smith was talking about, because I believe this is the case before, and I wanted to make sure it was still the case. In terms of what the resources that people can get from the county, I've heard from residents, you have to be in default first before. And one of the things that I know you and I have talked about this over the last 15 months is making sure that our residents, if they are having problems, to contact you and the housing department and not wait until they miss a payment or get behind. Even though that's a requirement from the county, I've been really trying to stress to residents to make sure if they are having difficulties, to reach out as soon as possible. And I just want to reiterate that again, because I think there are some people who look at what the county is offering and think they have to wait until they actually do miss a rent payment. But we, as you've emphasized, we want to get people before that happens.
Yeah, and every situation is different. There really aren't similar cases because, everybody's dealing with something different. We need to say that 100 more times. Reach out before you get to a critical stage. And what we're finding is that we have to move so quickly when people literally have a writ, which is the final document from the sheriff's office. And many of our families have received writs and they don't realize that they're going to be evicted. Even with the moratorium, just to be clear for the council as well as for the public, the moratorium just means that you can't be put out. It doesn't mean that you're relieved of the obligation of paying the back rent. It's literally kicking a can down the road. At the end of the day, those dollars have to be paid to the landlord. Some of our landlords are not agreeing to work with the county because the county is shaving off late fees and rent increases and other things. We're not doing that. The other thing to mention, Mayor Stewart, is that a landlord can apply on behalf of their tenant. So it doesn't have to be the tenant that is applying for assistance from the county. County is willing to work with property owners to clear the balances. So, but again, many of our landlords don't want to take a shave on the amount that's owed. And so they're willing to take the chance of the tenant not paying everything and evicting them.
I see people have a lot of questions and we have a very long agenda tonight, so I'm going to get to it. Councilman Dabala.
Yeah, thanks. I think you might have said at the end. So thank you for the update on this critical issue. Thank you to my colleagues for pressing the point. Bottom line, we've already got in this budget amendment funds for jump-starting eviction assistance before we get to the bigger package of how we will allocate ARPA funds generally. And you're recommending, if I understood this correctly, adding funds in to do a grant program for this entire fiscal year we're in to do, to select several, I presume several, since several groups are involved, several groups to do food assistance, get that started now before we come back in September, understanding that no matter what we do, food security is almost certainly going to be a piece of the package. So is that right, that you're recommending that we allocate a certain amount of money now to jumpstart the grant process to pass the money on to the groups that have the experience in our community in delivering, in helping with food security, in delivering food and ensuring food security? Have I got that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, and the number you mentioned was?
So it's $250,000. And so that's going to be a one year fiscal year commitment.
You're estimating it, no one knows, but you're estimating for the
Yeah.
year, and then you're thinking 2 groups, 5 groups, 10 groups?
Here's-
How far will that go?
I don't know. I'd love to see
Okay.
who's going to apply. I'm going to be, as the council knows, I sit as a member of the Montgomery County Food Council. So I'm going to be reaching out and really widely distributing the information about this RFP. I don't know who's going to apply, but I'm hoping it's the same groups that are currently working in the
Yeah,
city of
that's-
Menlo Park.
That's what I would hope, yeah.
There may be larger partners like MANA, Capital Area Food, because many of those are interconnected with these smaller groups that are doing work here in the city anyway. So we'll see. The other big part, and probably the larger part, is going to be the enrollment in the SNAP program. And that's actually going to take a live body working within our community. And I'll be listening for updates on the community ambassador program, because that may be a wonderful connection to bring people to SNAP through folks that are working in the community who will understand what the needs are for the folks that they're engaging with. And so, but that's going to take a live body, and I'm curious to see who will apply. There are a number of leaders in our community that do this work in the enrollment and education piece. And then the other big piece to this will be the language capacity.
Right.
We can't lose sight of that. And so some of that outreach will look multilingual, and the engagement piece will look culturally appropriate. And what we've learned through food is that many of our smaller markets that cater to our residents from East and West Africa and Central and Latin America, they're not getting as many people coming into their stores because, folks are, getting outreach in other ways. And so SNAP is available in any and all of those markets, and they need the business. And so this will be a wonderful opportunity to really tap into the economic development piece.
And so you're thinking that the SNAP piece is part of the grant program?
The SNAP piece will be a second prong to, right? The first piece will be the RFP. The second piece will be an RFP to just identify a provider that will help with enrollment, outreach, and education around the SNAP program.
Okay, and maybe I missed an email on this, but tell me, that's the 2 together is 250 that you're recommending, or are you recommending 2 separate pots of money here?
The 2 together, 250
Okay.
for all of that.
And
Thank
sorry,
you
if
for.
I could just jump in, this is again, as we're planning, I think the Ms. Wiggins and Ms. Clark, we were going to discuss this in September, and it came up as urgent
Yes.
as we were talking about it, and so we're going to start with 250. But the count, so this will
Right, as I
ensure
said,
that-
that's the estimate we have now, right?
Right.
So
It doesn't mean we
started.
come back in September, we come back in October, we can add to that.
I just was trying to get clear on what the actual proposal for tonight is. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll read we have an amendment to it once we're done
Great,
with this
thank
part.
you.
I can read that and we'll get clarity on that. But I
Thank you
wanted
for-
to allow Ms. Wiggins to first do her presentation and give the overall sense of where this money would be going.
Great, thank
So
you
it's two
for all of
separate-
that.
it's 2 separate tracks, but honestly, I think they really complement each other. I think they complement each other.
Mhm.
Councilman Searcy. Oh, sorry, Councilman Searcy.
Great. I think a couple of my questions have been addressed. One of the things that might be helpful to know is for that first pot that would the RFP that would be devoted more to direct food service provision, right? If I'm understanding that correctly, working with different nonprofits for the purpose of disseminating food to those in need in the community. One of the things I wonder, because in my mind I hear 250 and I'm like, it may not be enough, because I could immediately see how just doing the SNAP outreach alone could take you at about 75K to 100. So I wonder to what extent would we make sure, and again, this is a down the road question, but will probably happen while we're on recess. Will you be able to work into that RFP that you put out, perhaps the option for extension or increased capacity, kind of building that into the contracting mechanism, so that, if we find ourselves in a position once this thing is awarded and the need is great, because I think that there's still this need for us to fully understand and assess the need of food in our community, and these projects are a part of that. So is that possible? Is it possible for us to make sure that we build that contracting mechanism so that once we have our system set up, if we needed to allocate more dollars to this particular program because the need is greater than we anticipated, wouldn't necessarily be the case, we have to put this thing out to bid again, we might be able to renew for like another fiscal year. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. But let me also say this, and I didn't mean to say but. Yes. The folks that are going to be applying for this RFP are going to show us a budget. The great thing about the organizations that I think we're going to get is that this is part of a larger organizational budget. So it's not like we're the only funder for this work. Many of these organizations get funded to do the work that, all the groups that we've worked with, Small Things Matter and MANA and all these other groups, they already have funding. And so this will be a part of it. It's also something that we can build in to see what the real need is. And I think we probably want to look at this at the 6-month mark to see if they're on track, because it will take time to do the ramp up and then to really get into a rhythm around it. So absolutely. I think given the money that we're working with, it's just a jump start. Also keep in mind that the council allocated dollars for CP2 as a part of its FY22 budget. So if we need to, augment some of those dollars, we can also do that. But we'll be coming back to council because this is a priority. And if I remember correctly from the retreat, Mayor Stewart, this was number 1 or 2 on the council priority list. So, who knew we'd be in this, a bigger pandemic and possibly another round of this. So I think the 250 plus what we have already allocated will be enough. And we're also going to be scrutinizing budgets. Again, we want to make sure that our people are being served with these dollars.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Wiggins, and the acting city manager as well for the presentation. I'm glad to hear all these descriptions and explanations because it was something that we had talked about last week. And I think that the RFP program and the potential to augment that through other grant funds we already have, not to mention seeing where we are in the fall and deciding if we want to add more, makes sense. My other question is, though, and maybe you can just say a little bit about this now, we do have school starting up again at the end of August, and so that's a point at which some nutrition issues will also begin to be readdressed, as you pointed out. So in some ways, to me, the biggest area of concern is what happens between now and when school starts, or now and when the grant could actually be flowing, which wouldn't be until the fall. And so when you and I talked previously, you had a few things to say about what can take place during this period. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And it applies to both housing and nutrition, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I'd love to. I think the couple of things that are in place, so things aren't going to stop. And I'll give an example. Small Things Matter will continue to go to Hampshire Towers twice a month, 3 times a month, whatever they're doing. Many of these programs are continuing. So they were not dependent on COVID. They were already in existence. So that's a good thing. We will strongly encourage in our August newsletter, we still have time to get some of that information in about the county hub sites and other resources that are available, because it's just not ending. I think a lot of what's going on in Tacoma Park is our families have become excited about the ability to get services within half-mile of their home. They're going to the Tacoma Park Food Co-op. It's in their building. Councilmember Siemens and Adventists are literally coming into buildings with boxes. And so for the 6 weeks that there's this gap, I think we can direct people to other resources. And then again, things will change August 30th when students return to school. And as Councilmember Kovar mentioned, some of these nutritional issues may resolve themselves. But I don't foresee this being a major gap in time where we're going to just lose people.
I guess my question is, though, we don't know for sure, right? And so what would happen if at some point in the next 6 weeks, because as I mentioned, I've heard from some of these groups and they're getting less money from the county than they were getting before. That could be an emergency situation. And if we were meeting regularly every week, I would be less concerned because we could take action, but we're not going to be. So that's the part that's honestly making me a little nervous. I think the grant program sounds great, but that will take some time, obviously.
Yeah, the other resource that's available, and it's something that's been available for the past several years, MUST, our vendor who does the emergency assistance wraparound for the city of Tacoma Park, has a relationship with St. Luke's, which sits right at the corner of Dale and Colesville. They provide shelf-stable food, they provide veggies and fruit, and they also do gift cards. And so we have a running list of folks who take advantage of that on a monthly basis. So if there are folks that are listening or stakeholders in our community that engage with people who need food, reach out to the city, to my office, or to MUST. They're co-located with Health and Human Services right on Georgia Avenue. And we can make sure that folks get, I think it's a $50 or $75 gift card for the month of August. And that should cover those needs until we get this RFP in place and select some vendors to take over this work. So
this is my last thing. So do we have, though, other funds previously appropriated that staff has access to for nutrition programs that could be used during this period? So, okay.
So that's through MUST. That's through MUST.
And so say what MUST spells out, because not everybody.
So yeah, and thank you for that. I should not be doing acronyms at this point. MUST is Ministries United Silver Spring Tacoma Park. And we've had a long-standing contract with them. They're a phenomenal partner. Again, they're in a position where they can make referrals to St. Luke's, and they can also refer people to the Department of Health and Human Services if they need to apply for emergency food or for SNAP. So, and then, I must also highlight the vending machines that sit in front of our community center. I've seen people take food from that refrigerated unit. I think it's great. There are a lot of resources. But if people are really struggling now, they should reach out to the city. We can help direct them appropriately. I will mention the Down County Hub, which is at Clifton Park Baptist Church. That's Montgomery County's Down County Hub for food, and they're doing a ton of work. And also Adventist Community Services, which sits right on Sligo. And that's right outside of our city borders.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. do have a lot of questions and I have many things I would like to say and comment. However, this is clearly not the forum for me to be talking at all, so I recuse myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. All right. So in addition to, the amendment for our budget to include this reads, whereas due to the food insecurity challenges faced by Tacoma Park residents, constituting a fundamental need in the city that is also an ARPA eligible use, an ARPA allocation in the amount of $250,000 is included for the Housing and Community Development Community Partners Grant Program and will be distributed during fiscal year 2022 in support of local organizations that can expand food access for residents. So that will be included in the budget amendment for FY 2022, our first budget amendment. Would someone like to move the budget amendment with that included? Councilwoman Searcy moved, Councilmember Kovar second. Do I have, are there any amendments, questions? Councilmember Siemens, you have your hand up. Is that a old hand? He's gone. All right, it's old. I think he's recusing himself from this conversation. Okay, Councilman Dabala.
Yes, and thank you again to Grace and Jessica and everybody else for responding to the council's questions on that and stepping up to figure out a way to meet the need. This is a much different topic. This concerns one of the budget increase items that is not ARPA related. It's the it's on the version that I have. It's on page 2 of the table, and it's the item about $40,000 to upgrade a position, an intern position in human resources. And I understand that there's, especially with ARPA money coming in the door, that there's a great need an immediate need to have help in that office. I understand that we all thought it might be ARPA eligible and it's not. My concern is simply one thing, that the precedent for me of creating a full-time permanent position in the process of the first budget amendment, when we just did the budget a couple months ago, is problematic. And so I would simply want to not to reduce the amount of money, but to make clear in the in the whereases. I don't have it right in front of me, but I sent it out in an email with exactly which whereas it is that has to do with this item, to say that it would be term limited staff capacity, not staff capacity implying a permanent position, which we understand from our discussions last week was the intent. And so that's my concern, and that's my amendment, specifically to not wanting to establish a precedent at this point. We can, and if people want, we can add in, and we'll consider this in the next budget specifically as an ask. But I wanted to put that out as a proposed amendment to not set the precedent of creating full-time new positions during especially the first budget amendment process. So that's, do I
have a second for the, sorry.
Yeah.
Councilmember Kovar, you second the amendment? Okay, any other discussion on that? Comments? Councilman Kostick. Actually, sorry, Councilman Kovar, do you have your hand? Okay, thank you. All right, Councilman Kostick, and then Searcy.
Yeah, I just wondered if I could hear a little from the acting city manager about the position and if you have any thoughts on that approach.
Sure. So I appreciate Councilwoman Dabala's perspective, and she and I have discussed this on Friday and again today. And it isn't, we would have preferred to do it during the budget process, surely. I think from my perspective, it's reached a level where it wouldn't be wise to wait until the next budget cycle. I think that the HR's reliance on an intern over the past few years has not served us well in terms of when our current HR director joined the city, she had a full-time intern for a year. So she had an intern who was working 40 hours per week. And that there was more than enough work for that intern to be treated essentially as a full-time staff member. So that intern had a full workload. And then she lost that intern during COVID. So over the whole past year, she didn't have an intern. And so I don't think that the department's staff capacity is right sized. And I think the result of that reliance on an intern is a compounding effect on certain projects that our HR director just hasn't been able to get to because she's operating on a emergency, she's just trying to kind of tread water, and we're not able to really advance on some of the key projects that we need to. So I think it will really have a benefit on all of our staff if our HR director is freed up by adding staff capacity. And by staff capacity, I mean being able to hire someone who has expertise in HR, who we know will be with us for a couple years. So Councilwoman Dabala, I think, another scenario we might consider would be to at least have some assurance that it's a limited term position over a couple years. I think it's hard for us to hire a quality candidate if we don't know whether we'll have funding for the position past 1 year. So we do feel like it's an urgent and immediate need, but we also appreciate that this isn't this is a little bit off cycle. And I certainly appreciate that, Councilwoman Dabala is bringing that to council's attention.
Thank you. I'm going to listen to the rest of the conversation and continue to ponder the proposal. I also just want to say thank you to Ms. Wiggins. I didn't speak up before because I didn't have anything concrete to say and didn't want to take extra time, but I appreciate your work on this.
Great, Councilman Searcy.
Thanks. And, I understand Councilmember Dabala's concern and, the need for us to make sure this kind of goes back into the conversation that we had earlier about making sure that when we're budgeting and when we're putting that budget forward, we make sure that it's accurate, right? Especially as it relates to the FTE counts and key, especially those larger ticket programmatic kind of activities, that those things are clearly spelled out. But I also understand, the point about it is extremely difficult to hire a person for a year. That's nearly impossible. So I guess one question I have is, what is an appropriate term that would make it easy for recruitment? In my view, that's probably going to be about 3 years. So we're committing to upgrading this position for about 3 years just to make sure we get quality candidates in the recruitment process, and they have some assurances that they're going to be on the job for about 3 years. So I don't know, acting city manager, what would be the best in terms of recruitment and how we would need to limit that term. Because I too am concerned, especially given that with the ARPA dollars, we're dealing with contracting and different union kind of things that need to happen as a result of the ARPA dollars. And then we have to bring on hiring folks. And then we have all these contracts. There's just going to be a lot. Mm-hmm. And so making sure that we're properly staffed is important, but I also want to make sure that we're staying true to our internal controls and making sure that we're not just adding FTE throughout the course of the year and that we're doing it in a mindful way. So what's that sweet spot in terms of the amount of the?
I would think with the upgrades to the HR system, I think that once we get those more streamlined in out years, there may be less of a lesser need for staff than there currently is. But I do think we need some solid capacity going into the next few years to be able to, there'll be some overlap between systems, there'll be a migration to a new system, plus the added complexity that COVID-19 brings. I mean, our HR director got us through hazard pay and administrative leave and teleworking transitions and all that kind of thing. So I would think, 3 to 4 years would be acceptable.
So that's helpful to hear, and I would be amenable to a 3-year. One of the things that I do want to mark for you, and we'll definitely need to mark for our internal, our incoming city manager, we have a tendency to use interns as HR substitutes, and that's just not, it's just not good business. So there definitely needs to be a full assessment of some of our or structure, where some of the staffing gaps are, what's the appropriate type of hire that needs to go into some of these shops. And even if we're not able to hire them today, we at least need to know, for at least from my perspective as a council, it's helpful for me to know that based on the amount of work that we're trying to give, for example, Grace, I'm picking on you because I can see you, HCD is 2 times the number of FTE that they have. And, you know, and that is at the forefront of our minds, that we have been recommended to have 7 people. And right now we only have 3. So I think that's something that will be helpful to know. And so that we can get out of this habit of using these interns, which by the time you get an intern up and running, they're out the door because they're so term limited. So I do think that that's something that we need to work into the conversation for the next budget cycle. And we're talking about the FTE count.
Yep.
Great. Any other comments on this? I'll just say thank you to Councilwoman Searcy. Councilman, sorry, because I know they're new.
I guess I was just curious what this, if I could be reminded of the specific language of the proposed amendment.
I was trying to find it, and
I was too.
So many emails this week.
I found it, and I was literally, if you're talking about what I suggested simply adding in the actual resolution, budget ordinance, page 2, lines 1 to 2, where it describes what the use of this budget increase would be for. I was simply looking to add the phrase term limited, and I had not, pending hearing from the acting city manager, I hadn't pegged it for any particular length of time. While I have the floor, if I would like to know, this is a 40,000 increase, which would include benefits. You said that last time, but if we are going to consider doing this for more than 1 fiscal year, what do we have now for the intern? Like, what's the total that we would be?
The total we have for the intern
2 and 3.
is 37,000. It's a full-time intern budgeted in the fiscal.
Okay, so call it for rounding up for a moment, 40 and 40. The commitment for out years would be 80.
Well, we're assuming we would have continued to have a full-time intern.
Well, that's a big if, isn't it? Okay. So if you're converting this position to a full-time staff person, this budget amendment says nothing one way or the other about then more money for an intern. So I'll just note that and leave it at that. So again, the specific amendment was simply to add the word term limited in front of staff capacity on the whereases, the top of page 2, the clause that refers to this budget increase.
Do you have that, Councilman Kostick? Okay, thank you. Councilmember Smith.
So, Ms. Clark, you may have already covered this. Why are we having such difficulty staffing the HR department? You know, I've not recalled having such trouble, 1, finding people, and 2, keeping people.
Yeah, so Councilman Smith, it's not so much an issue of staff turnover or recruiting. Are you talking about the city staff generally or within the HR department?
HR, I mean.
Oh, no, we have 2 full-time HR generalists who have been with the city for several years now, in addition to our HR director. And like I said, we had the HR intern position filled for, I guess, the year before COVID. And that intern left right as COVID was starting. And then the HR intern position was cut as part of the COVID budget reconciliation. So it isn't an issue of keeping that position filled.
So before that time, how many people did we have in that department?
We had 3.5. I mean, I'm sorry, 4, but one is an intern. One is a full-time intern, so it isn't counted as an FTE. So in the budget organizational chart, you would see 3 FTEs, but there's also a full-time intern. So 4 total bodies in the department.
Okay, and so with this hire, that will bring you back to 4? Is that how you look
It
at
would still be 4, but instead of having a full-time intern, we would have a third HR generalist. So we would have the human resources director and then 3 HR generalists.
Okay.
Because we're upgrading the full-time intern position to a full-time permanent position.
Okay, and the HR director, you guys think this is going to work?
We do. We've discussed it at length. And again, I think it's about freeing her up so that she really is at the executive level and able to get back to writing policy, doing process improvement, running our wage study, doing kind of the proactive approach. Just as one example, we really don't have an onboarding or offboarding program. We haven't been able to do much professional development over the past 2 years. HR really hasn't been able to be proactive on much of anything. They've been incredibly reactive. And we are facing serious delays in terms of getting former and current staff members the information they need. And some of our basic HR processes are very stretched out longer than they should be, which means that it introduces certain legal liabilities that will compound over time. So like I said, we would not be asking for this in a budget amendment if we didn't feel like it's not something we wanted to wait until next budget cycle.
And this isn't going through ARPA funds, correct?
No, it would not be ARPA eligible. It's too general.
So if this number of issues are going on, how is it that we can get any type of resolution just bringing on a full-time intern?
Well, that's why it's combined with an upgrade of the HR system, because our 2 HR generalists currently are doing a lot of duplicate, even triple data entry between 3 different systems and manual processes. So they're doing a lot of data entry when they could be doing kind of proactive policy development, program development, but they're not able to do any of that, which is why we're doing the system upgrade in addition to the asking for a full-time position.
I would just ask that, I guess my colleagues will approve this, but that you and the future city manager come back to us and let us know how many real FTEs that we need to consider so that we don't continue to have these issues in HR. Because this is the first time, I heard that, we had these type of problems happening. And
yeah, and I think that's because our HR team has been working very hard to work with what they have, which means that they've been working incredibly long hours, which is part of the reason for the request also.
Okay, all right. But I would like to hear something in the future. Thank you.
Great. And if I thank you, Councilmember Smith, for those questions. I just want to ask a clarifying point. So basically, this is kind of taking us back to the staffing of the department pre-COVID.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councilman Searcy.
So I just want to make sure that I understand what exactly we're proposing, right? And I tend to think in FTE, so bear with me. So you currently have 3 full-time equivalent and an intern, right?
Correct.
And what you want is actually 4 FTE equivalent and still holding that intern.
No, we're using the intern salary.
Okay, so
to fund
not gonna have, so you're getting rid of that intern.
Correct.
Okay, so we are indeed, because I think I got a little confused earlier. We are upgrading that position, which means we're getting rid of that intern. That intern does not exist. We will not see that in the next budget.
Correct.
It's taking that salary and pushing it into this new fourth full-time equivalent person. So you
Correct.
4 FTE total.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Great. I thank you for that description. I fully support moving forward in this. I think as Councilmember Smith said, please let us know what the department needs. I think, you know, this is really going back to the staffing that we had pre-COVID. During our COVID budget last year, we did put a number of positions on hold, and then we cut a number of positions because we didn't know what was going to hit the city. I can't think of anything more, you know, there are a lot of things important, but if our staff can't get their work done, then we cannot serve the public that we need to serve. And I know the last 16, 17 months has been very stressful. I appreciate all the work that they're doing. And I do think this is a very important position to staff. And so I hope we keep it in this budget amendment. Okay, seeing no other hands, will the clerk call the vote on the amendment?
Sorry, so just to be clear, the amendment is on the term limit language. Yes.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay. Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember Dvala,
Yes.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens, Councilmember Smith,
Yes, but can I have yes with a question? I'm sorry. Can I just ask one quick question? Will this position be advertised, or do you already have someone in mind for this position?
It would be advertised.
All right, thank you.
So is that a yes, Councilmember Smith?
Yes. Yes, it is a yes.
Okay, Councilmember Searcy?
Yes.
Okay, Mayor Stewart?
No. Mm-mm. Thank you. All right. Any other amendments or changes? Councilmember Kovar.
We finished that amendment, correct?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I just had one other couple of questions for Ms. Wiggins. We talked about the food and nutrition part. I just wanted to get into the housing part for just a moment. And I know we have a lot more to do, so I'll make it quick, but it's the same set of questions. Given that we'll be in this break and we're allocating $150,000 for eviction assistance, eviction assistance can easily cost several thousands of dollars in each case. And so 150,000, if you divide it up, we can maybe help a couple dozen people. And so depending on how things unfold, and I know we don't know that, and I know we also know that the county has a lot of money and other maybe additional ARPA funds as well. But is there any downside to saying instead of 150,000, let's make it 250,000? If we don't use it, we don't use it. But it's there just in case this eviction cliff could just become a nightmare, and we just don't know how it's going to play out, and we're going to be gone in terms of not meeting formally and able to approve more funding. So that's my question. Should we just add another $100,000 to this just to help shore up what we can do to get through this period before we return in September?
I'm not going to turn down money. So if you
Your
want
comment about the 150, I guess.
if you
is
want
what
to
I
add
mean.
another 100,000, yeah, I'm not opposed to that. What I will say is that MUST also has an appropriation for fiscal year 2022 of $50,000. So in essence, the city works very closely with MUST, which means that any referrals that we're making back and forth, we're using kind of the same pot of money. The allocated FY22 money, which is their $50,000 plus $150,000 through ARPA. But I'm not going to turn it down. If you want to add another 100,000, I'd love to have that available to serve residents.
Well, I'm just gonna say I'd like to offer that we increase it by 100,000 for the housing eviction piece.
Let me just add one thing, please. So it's not just evictions, it's also utility disconnections. It's also, there are a whole bunch of these other soft things that we do in addition to eviction. So I appreciate the generosity.
Well, it's just me. I don't know if
Do I have a
everybody will
second
agree
for
with
the
me, but
amendment?
I'd like to formally offer that, yes.
Okay. Do I have a second for the amendment? Oh, I'll second it. No one's gonna second it. I'll second it. Any discussion?
I would just say I appreciate Councilmember Kovar's amendment. I was going to propose something larger, but I do appreciate the extra $100,000. I think this is a crisis and it needs as much attention as possible, which means resources brought to bear.
Great. All right, Councilman Dabala, do you have? Council.
I just want to say that while I appreciate the need and I appreciate the gesture, I also have some concern that we asked staff for what the immediate needs were and how much they were, and they told us, and that was in the budget amendment. And so we can always use more money for anything. And so I'm a little uncomfortable with deciding in 2 or 3 minutes that we're gonna go beyond what staff had recommended in any given area.
Well, I'll just say, based on my conversations with staff in the lead up to this meeting and what we've heard tonight, it's a big question mark. We don't really know. And to me, it's kind of like an insurance policy. I understand what my colleague is saying, and I think I am generally pretty frugal in how I approach the city budget, but this is one where if we don't do it and then something happens, there's really nothing we can do about it. If we do it and we don't end up using it, I'm not going to say no harm, no foul, because every dollar is a dollar and it's coming from somewhere, but we'll be using that over the course of the fiscal year anyway, in all likelihood. So it seems to me it's just an insurance policy for the break.
And I support this. Thank you, Councilmember Kovar, for putting it forward. I do just want to mention that if there is an emergency, the city council can vote to come back to session. So it's not like we're all leaving the country and we can't, and it is impossible for us to come back. I just want to make sure the public understands this and that city staff understands this, that we're doing this budget amendment and it was introduced last week in order to start putting things in motion. I am fully supportive of adding this $100,000, but if we find in another 2 weeks after we go on recess that there is something that we did not predict, the city council can come out of recess and reallocate funds or anything else that we may need to do. So I just want to be very clear on that going on recess and doesn't mean we can't come back again if it's needed. And given that we're still meeting by Zoom, all of you can go on vacation and still come back for a meeting and don't have to be in person. I just want to make that clear. Councilmember Smith?
I want to make sure I understand that the money that is still in the COVID fund, staff can get access to that without any council action. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
No.
Oh,
so the COVID-19 Emergency Assistance Fund no longer exists. It's ARPA is now where we need to allocate for any emergency assistance.
Okay, so we don't have any pot of money other than what we're allocating now?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Smith, for asking that.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other hands, will the clerk call the vote on the amendment?
Sorry, Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala,
No.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens, Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right, any other amendments or comments on the budget amendment? All right, seeing none, and I will ask the clerk to call the vote.
All right, Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala,
Yes.
Budget amendment. Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens, Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Do we have to vote to go into the stormwater management board before I'm looking at the city clerk. It wasn't on the agenda. I just want to make sure we probably should,
You
right?
don't
Yeah.
usually do that. You can do it if you
Why
want
don't
to.
we do it just, yes.
Sure.
I'm seeing the city attorney nodding his head, so I believe
Okay.
we are supposed to do that. We will now vote to go into and become the Stormwater Management Board to take up our Stormwater Budget Amendment number 1 for FY 2022. Will someone like to move a motion to become the Stormwater Management Board? Councilman Costick, do I have a second? Councilman DeBala. Will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar.
And this is just going into the board at the moment, right?
Correct.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala,
Yes.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right, now would someone like to move the budget amendment for FY 2022 for our stormwater budget, budgets is amendment number 1. Councilman Searcy, do I have a second? Councilman Costick, any amendments or questions to the stormwater budget amendment? Okay, seeing none, will the clerk call the vote?
Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala,
Yes.
Councilmember Costick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right. Our next voting item tonight is our first reading ordinance amending the Tacoma Park Code, Title 7, Purchasing and Taxation, Chapter 7.04, General Provisions, Chapter 7.08, Source Selection and Contract Formation, Chapter 7.16, Real and Personal Property, and Chapter 7.32, Admissions and Amusement Tax. This was posted. Highlighted changes we made during the work session last week were highlighted in yellow. I'm going to ask if someone would like to move the ordinance. Councilman Searcy moved. Do I have a second? Councilman Costick, second. Any questions, comments, amendments to propose? Nothing? All right, I will ask Councilman Kovar.
You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?
I was waiting.
I expressed my concern previously, including last week, about the increase up to 50,000. And I agree 100% it does need to be increased. And I support all the other reforms that are embedded within this. And there were a couple of things in there that I had suggested. And so I appreciate that those were picked up. I do think the 50,000 is higher than I personally feel like we ought to go. And I know one of the things that's been discussed is that it's burdensome for staff each time they have to do this. And I appreciate that that's the case. There really aren't that many. And if you look back over this year, when I did a quick look, there's a handful that are in that 30 to 50 range, which I think is, if it was up to me, we went as high as 30. The number of additional votes we'd have to take is, I think, fairly modest. You know, there were between 5 to 7 or so that were in that range that we approved this year. So I understand it's extra work. I don't minimize that. But I think in terms of us being aware, we've talked a lot about wanting more transparency and budgeting. And I think this is sort of an extension of that. It's not that I feel the items that we voted on were inappropriate as much as just I think it's an important check for the council and for the public to understand what it is we're voting on. And so again, if it had gone up to 30 or so, I would have been fine with that at this level. I'm not planning to vote in favor of it for that reason. I've talked to enough of my colleagues on the council to know that I'm in a decided minority on that. So I will leave it at that.
Did you want to propose an amendment or no? Just,
I'm not doing that, no.
okay, thank you. Any other comments or Councilman Costick?
I'd like to propose a very small wording amendment. And I assume I'm looking at, I was just glancing at this now, in terms of the specifics on the language on page 6 with regard to the minority women-owned business enterprise. I assume this is legal language that is how we more or less need to describe these entities, but I would propose the amendment that in the last sentence we say individuals with disabilities instead of disabled individuals.
Thank you. I think that's, we'll second that amendment, and I'm pretty sure city attorney can look at it and let us know, but
maybe we can do that as a friendly amendment if people.
yeah, I think we can just do that as a friendly amendment. Thank you for catching that. Councilman Devala?
Thank you. Sorry about that. This is just a question of clarification for, I guess, the city attorney. So we had a long discussion last week about the environmental purchasing and the nuclear-free purchasing requirements. So to clarify for all who are listening, just so make sure I got this right. So in this version we are voting on, the current environmental purchasing regulations ordinance is included without changes. The nuclear free provisions that relate to purchasing are not included in renumbered in this section. And there is a provision that allows for the city manager to adopt regulations in the future to update and or to expand on either of these or some of the other sections. Have I got that right?
So I want to make sure that I'm answering with clarity. The provisions that are in the existing code that relate to the environmental purchasing and the nuclear purchasing, those remain as they are in this particular version. There is no change to those. With respect to regulations, I don't recall whether we inserted another provision related to regulations. My recollection is that we took that out with respect to environmental purchasing because we were leaving the code as is. That was the alternative if we were going to be taking out the environmentally preferable purchasing. So we did not insert that at this time. Because remember, we had that long discussion about the lengthy process of regulations. Now, can we insert a provision that relates to adopting regulations? Yes, but I thought that my recollection of the discussion was we need to do it in a more thorough manner as part of the process in addressing the code. So I'm not sure that it's necessary that it be in there at this particular time. But I'm open to putting in whatever is council's desire, of course.
Councilman Devala, are you offering it?
Yeah, so to restate, the environmental purchasing requirements are essentially not changed.
That's correct.
They may be renumbered so that they're
correct.
Okay. The nuclear free provisions are not changed and they are not renumbered. They're not moved. And
they are not changed. I cannot remember right now whether they are renumbered.
Okay. And they don't seem to be in there right now. That's what prompted me to ask. And as far as the discussion about moving some of these to regulation, as opposed to in the ordinance, there is or is not the flexibility to pick that up already. I mean, to pick that up in the future do we need to add something that says at some future time, the city manager has the authority to adopt regulations? Is that in here somewhere or not? I'm a little fuzzy.
There is nothing like that in there. If that's something that you want to put in there, you know, we can do that, of course.
I don't know exactly how to phrase it at this point, but I would suggest that it would be wise to have that in here so that we don't have to go through adding it in later if the city manager comes back and says, yeah, we would like to recommend that some of this be in regulation.
So Councilwoman DeBala, are you proposing that as a code revision or a whereas clause in the ordinance? Because it might make sense as a new whereas clause.
Okay, well, try that. Okay.
Sometime in the future, city staff should propose creating regulations with relation to the purchasing code, which we have not done in the past.
I actually did think that it was already in there, so I'm a little surprised to hear that it's not. And yes, I think that would be a good whereas, because we don't know what the future will bring.
So Councilman DeBala, do you want to work on that and propose it for second reading?
That sounds like a good plan. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, amendments? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to take the vote.
I need to refresh my memory exactly what you're voting on.
We're voting on the purchasing ordinance.
It's the first reading ordinance.
The first reading ordinance.
Wording change,
There was a friendly amendment to change disabled individuals to individuals with disabilities. No other changes have been made. Councilman DeBala will be suggesting a change, potentially suggesting a change in the whereas clause for the second reading.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So with that understanding, Councilmember Kovar.
No.
Councilmember DeBala.
Yes.
Councilmember Costick.
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
No.
Did you say yes?
No.
Said no.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Searcy.
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes.
Okay, so 5-2.
Okay, where are we? Sorry. I think next is the consent agenda, which includes a resolution regarding the subdivision of Garland Avenue and wage adjustments for staff in Local 400 and those non-union represented staff. Would someone like to move the consent agenda?
So moved.
Councilmember Smith moved. Do I have a second? Councilmember Siemens. Ask the clerk to call the vote.
Councilmember Kovar.
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Costick.
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens.
Aye.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy.
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes.
Okay,
Now we'll move
7-0.
on to our work sessions. The first is a contract for sports officiating services. I can't tell you how happy I am to have this actually in front of us, and meaning that that people are playing sports again in person, and that we need to bring back folks to officiate that. I think this one was pretty straightforward. I don't know if the acting city manager had anything to tell us on this, or if anybody had any questions. No, all right. Seeing nothing, that'll come back for a vote next week. And next, we'll turn it over to a discussion of committees, and I will now turn it over to my colleagues, Councilman DeBala, Costick, and Searcy, to walk us through this.
Thank you. I think I'm starting off, but Councilmember Searcy, would you happen to be able to pull up there we go. Thank you. All right, we are back to talk about council appointed committees. And our goals for tonight's discussion are to summarize our recruitment plans for including stipends for recruiting. Wow, it's been a long day. Summarize content of code changes, review status of individual boards, commissions, and committees. And next week, I'll look ahead to going through actual code language. We have on the council agenda a link to a list of possible draft code changes, but next week we'll actually be looking at language. And thank you to the city attorney for working on that. Next page, please. So recruitment and appointments. As we've been talking about, our goal is for a more diverse, productive group of committee members that come from many segments of our community. So we have been talking about semi-annual recruitment and appointments with an emphasis on annual appointments. We've talked a little more in depth with the city clerk and the city attorney in our small subgroup over the past week or so. And they've raised some concerns with having a very robust semi-annual recruitment schedule where we're appointing people at kind of very different times and trying to standardize when people's terms are coming up and some of the complications associated with that. So what it looks like we are recommending at this point is doing some semi-annual recruitment and appointments, but really focusing heavily on trying to do a larger group of annual appointments each year rather than making a super robust kind of secondary recruitment schedule. Recruitment will happen this August and September with applications due September 30th. Council appointments will make the appointments by October 15th with a subgroup reviewing the applications. We would have a common application and criteria for member selection. And then in terms of recruitment going out, I'm not sure if we have a slide on this, and I'm stopping after this, so I will just note we would be going out and doing a number of the things we've discussed previously with regard to outreach with tables at events. Staff have already started working on a table at National Night Out to spread information about applying for committees. And we could do some tables there. We'll be having newsletter articles on the application process and an ad in the fall guide this fall, as well as social media posts and advertisements and outreach, specifically in multifamily buildings and some of the newsletters and publications and listservs that are in multifamily buildings and in neighborhood associations. And of course, council members doing outreach directly to residents as well. And then for discussion tonight, we discussed I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, the concept of having stipends for board and commission members and committee members. So we want to, at the end of this discussion, have some sense of the council in terms of where you are leading on providing stipends for committee members, as well as the question of reimbursement for childcare and transportation. Since we will need to start going out with the recruiting very soon, we'll need to share that information with the public. And I will now turn over, I believe, to Councilmember Dabala or Councilmember Searcy.
Me, and before so one of the things we want to come back at the end is to just confirm that we agreed last time round on $40 stipends for commissions and boards, the quasi-judicial groups. We were not clear whether you all were also supporting doing that for all committees, which essentially doubles the cost, no surprise there. And if that was the case, whether we would do there was support for reimbursement for childcare and transportation, but how it meshes with the stipend, we hadn't all nailed down. So we'll come back to that. But that's the questions there. So going on to just running through quickly the the code changes based on what we had come up with in our initial discussion with the city attorney. So we had talked about the overarching purposes of the standing committees that would be incorporated in the code. Each committee, each standing committee would still have a short description of its individualized purpose in the code. Our intent is once new committees are appointed / reappointed to work with those committees on the minor code changes that have been identified in the spring and work with them to look at the more detailed list of duties and responsibilities to see if they're still fresh. But we wouldn't tackle that now in the code. With quasi-judicial and regulatory committees, these would also retain their individual purposes and procedures, because in some cases, the procedures are very detailed. They relate specifically to that committee, for example, COLTA or the Tree Commission. So we're not proposing to eliminate those, but to continue that overarching theme of why do we have committees at all and commissions and boards. We talked about more consistent naming. There are some legal reasons why some are boards and some are commissions. So we probably won't want to change that right now in the code, but to try as much as possible, for example, Arts and Humanities Commission. Well, that's not a commission the way that the Tree Commission is. So can that be a committee? So to the degree that we can be consistent in code in the language without messing ourselves up, that is our intent. So to refresh you all in what's not in the code, but which we had all talked about and agreed to in the spring, is that a common set of model bylaws rather than each committee being charged to come up with their own in the code, is a common set of model bylaws that folks and procedures for the standing committees in our view, doesn't have to be in code. Strengthen member orientation and training. You heard a presentation on that earlier in the spring. We have the code of conduct that we adopted by resolution. And in the code, it will say that it's required that folks participate in that. And we strongly urge an annual review and feedback from the council with each committee on purposes and tasks. And the best timing for that would be priority setting. And that would go, we think, a long way to strengthening council and committee connections in general, which was, if you recall, one of the issues that was raised in the survey of committee members some time ago. Next slide, please. So that's the changes, the overall changes, purpose, and so forth. The next set of changes that we had proposed for code is in membership. Generally, with some exceptions that we'll get to in a minute, 7 to 9 committee members is ideal, rather than anywhere from 5 to 15 that we've got right now. Members should be residents of Tacoma Park. 3-year terms for quasi-judicial and regulatory boards, 2-year terms for standing committees, advisory committees, a total of 6 years for everybody with at least a 1-year break. And one exception for sure is the Board of Elections. Because of the unique nature of their work, they had made the case this spring for 3-year terms for a total of 9 years because of the experience that's necessary to do that job well. We were going to stagger term appointments only to start, and that would not include the mid-year. That would just be right now, so that everybody comes out square at the same time in a given year, not a lot of patchwork appointments. And I said required adherence to the code of conduct. Next slide, please. The exceptions that we had all talked about on the council, just to review, exceptions to what I just said. Youth council, maintain the current system. You all got the list of council of eager potential appointees already for this coming school year. That's great. So not to be changing that. COLTA has specific membership slots as defined in the current code, and allowing non-residents as rental property owners. With us, the staff and the COLTA committee themselves, that's what we recommend. Emergency Preparedness Committee, retaining the institutional members as well as the residents. Election boards, I said, Arts and Humanities Commission is the other place where non-resident members are appropriate. Folks who, following the model of COLTA, folks who work or have art business in Tacoma, even if they don't actually live here. And just to remind you, the Police Pension Board only has 2 resident members, and so it's not really part of this conversation about amendments to the code. Next slide, please. Code changes for individual groups. This is one of the areas we need your attention on today. So you all may recall that we recommended, and we discussed discontinuing a few particular committee groups. The Personnel Appeals Board, and there was an alternative developed with the city clerk for how that work would get done, although that has not been translated yet to the city attorney in terms of whether and how that needs to be captured in code. So we know we need to do that, but that conversation had taken place. Facade Advisory Board, same thing. The city staff worked with the board and the county staff of the Historic Commission, what that would look like if that board was discontinued. So we are recommending and I believe we've all agreed to discontinue those. You've heard us say and you've heard the Complete Safe Streets Committee say that they think that their work is done, but they would like us to consider a task force in the future on Vision Zero type issues. So the ones that we most want to make sure we have discussion on tonight, our Committee on the Environment, we have recommended that we reconstitute it as a green team under the Sustainable Maryland program. It turns out that in the city code now they have 2 purposes, the second of which is that. So we can talk about whether that could include or focus on some of the climate work that needs to be done right now, or whether that could be handled another way. Second one, to make sure we're all get a chance to discuss Commemoration Commission. We had recommended phasing it out so that we could consult them on how the transition to the tasks, the key tasks that they've got listed would get accomplished in the absence of a committee. The city attorney has recommended that as far as the code goes, we discontinue the structure of the commission now, rather than come back in 6 months and do it at some future date. Same thing with the Nuclear Free Committee. For the purposes of the committee, we had talked about phasing out the membership, seeking their advice on the transition. We did start that discussion a couple of weeks ago last week during purchasing code, because that's one key area. And for purposes of the code, to discontinue it in the code at this time. So again, trying to be clear between what is going to be in the code as opposed to what council will recruit for or not recruit for, what council will take action on now as opposed to at some point in the future. So we'll come back to this discussion. And well, yeah, maybe this is the place to break. Councilmember Searcy, do you want to continue with your couple slides, or is this a good place to break in and have the discussion on the 2 areas we need to talk about tonight?
It might be good for us to just go ahead and finish out the slide.
Okay, go ahead.
Way we can circle back, have our decision points, and then close out the discussion.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So, as council members Dabala and Costick had communicated, there's a lot of work that's happening. And so what I am going to cover are the things that you all will need to do, including us as well. So we're going to need your help with actively recruiting in wards and with community groups. I know we'll be in recess in August, but in order for us to make sure that we have a quality pool of candidates, we'll need you all's help with communicating to the community in August and September. We will need in September, there'll be quite a bit of work. We're going to hit the ground running and trying to finalize everything that we'll need for committees and to get everyone set up by early October. So we'll need to approve funds for stipends, and that's why the decision point that we'll have to make tonight will be so helpful. We'll also need to approve code changes, and Councilmember Dabala talked and summarized quite a few of what some of those changes may be, but the devil will be in the details, as our city attorney has rightfully told us, in terms of the broader implications that some of the changes that we may propose to these committees may have to other aspects of the code. We also will need a subgroup to review applicants, keeping in mind, with increased recruitment efforts, means that we'll have larger, fingers crossed, we'll have larger pools of candidates to choose from. And so it'll be really important for us to be able to apply the application review criteria to using a subgroup to identify and select candidates. And then we'll also still need to figure out and actually implement our annual review and feedback process on committees, their charges and tasks. Again, one of the things that we've heard time and time again from committee members is that, they need that interaction with the council to know that what they're doing is of use to us. And so making sure that we are working that into our annual review process, as we've discussed in our annual priority setting, is something that we'll need to do starting in January. And so, again, this is just to summarize the where we are, and then we'll go back and talk about the stipends, as well as just getting confirmation on decisions regarding the groups. But again, where we are right now is retaining 5 groups: Board of Elections, COLTA, the Ethics Commission, Tree Commission, the Noise Control Board. For now, in the broader context of discussions that we'll need to have around the Public Safety Task Force recommendations, this particular group may come into play. Treat separately, as most members are not residents, that's for the Police Pension Board. And then we're talking about retaining 6 groups: Arts and Humanities, the Emergency Preparedness Committee, Grants Review Committee, Rec Committee, we talked about renaming that, as well as the Green Team and the Youth Council. So with that, I'm going to go back to Councilmember Costick's slide where we talked about stipends. And so when we last spoke, it seemed as if there was general consensus around offering a $40 stipend for volunteers. The question that we have for you all is, do we want to make that for this initial try, do we want to make that $40 stipend available to all boards and commissions? Or do we want to start with the quasi-judicial? So that's the first question.
And to remind you all, the experience that we uncovered is primarily with the quasi-judicial type experience of other communities, is primarily with the quasi-judicial types of groups. And the estimated cost, if everybody gets appointed and everybody takes everything, the estimated cost would be 25,000 for just the commissions and boards and 40,000 for everybody, based on some reasonable assumptions about how many times groups meet, et cetera. Something in that range. That's what we were looking at.
And just to clarify, our wording here says $40 stipends, but it's $40 per meeting.
Yes. Sorry.
Thank you. Yep.
Okay, so do we have a recommendation from the committee? Because I feel like we had a recommendation the last time, but my memory might be wrong.
We all seem to have slightly different remembrances of what we talked about.
Well, what we recommended was everybody, but that would be $40,000. $40,000. And then the conversation was along the lines of, should we start smaller and try it out?
Okay.
Can you repeat what the 25 was again? I didn't quite hear which of the two options that was.
If it was just commissions and boards and making some assumptions like every seat is filled and they meet a certain number of times a year, et cetera, that would be around $25,000.
I think to me, we should do both because if anything, the quasi-judicial are decision-making entities that could affect people around the city and all parts of the city. And if we're concerned about wanting to be able to have a diverse makeup of the membership, particularly when decisions are being made that could impact people, I think we don't want to draw that line and say, well, for a board, for a quasi-judicial, we're only going to take the people who can afford to serve on it. And I know that's not.
I think, Councilmember Kovar, we meant it the other way around.
Okay, I still think
Only provide stipends to every member without criteria, offer them to every member, and either offer them only to the quasi-judicial commission or offer them to everybody.
I would still offer it to everybody.
I would offer it to everybody too.
I personally agree as well. Not on behalf of the subcommittee, but for myself.
Right? Is that
other thoughts? So it's around the $40 stipend, $40 per meeting stipend for all boards and commissions or only the quasi judicial? It sounds like most people are leaning towards all.
Yeah, and I would just have a provision in there if people choose not to take it, maybe that money can be kept in the pot and used for, whatever additional things like childcare and Chromebooks we want to provide to people if we do.
I think I saw here. Councilmember Siemens.
Yeah, I guess I would feel more comfortable if we're going to go with all to make it $30 instead of $40. If we were going to go with just the two groups, then I would. I think that would be enough to tell us whether this works or not. So we decide, future council decide whether to up it to all the committees.
Okay. So I want to make sure I hear what you're saying. So bear with me as I repeat it back. You're suggesting start with a lower amount, $30 per meeting. And are you proposing we start with quasi judicial at that lower amount and see how that works before expanding it to everyone or making a decision about going up to $40?
I guess what I was proposing was the two alternatives, either go with just the quasi-judicial and whatever the other one was at $40, or if we're going to open it to all of them, all committees, then go to $30.
Okay.
But I think just doing the two groups at $40 would be a good measure of how successful it is in meeting our goal.
I see the city clerk has her hand up.
So I just wanted to mention, you may not need to decide this tonight, but you should think about whether or not you're including the youth council in this. And I just want to confirm whether you want to include the youth council in the stipend group.
Mhm. Councilman Siemens, is
We're
that
making it more confusing.
Well, so the way we have it set up now, they are not a regulatory body. So they would be in, if you want to talk about group 2. So if quasi judicial and regulatory is group 1, then they wouldn't be in that one. They would be in the everybody, unless we specifically left them out.
And I think
on the $40 stipends, just where we got that number, is 40 is the low end of the existing programs that other communities have. The stipends that they offer range from $40 to $60 per meeting. Nobody does it by the hour. Nobody pays for prep time, as far as we could find out. But that's where we got the 40 as what folks who are practicing it now, where they have settled. FYI.
And I think the city clerk raises a good point, because I think if we provide a stipend, then the youth council members cannot get SSL hours for that. So maybe that's something that we want to explore a little bit and maybe ask the next youth council. They may decide, but I do know if we provide stipends, then and I think they all apply and get SSL hours for doing the youth council. But
well, that's a practical answer to the question then, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's for now.
Councilman Kostick?
I guess with regard to the youth council, I'm interested in getting a little more information. I also think we could maybe offer people the option of, if it's a conflict, of choosing between SSL or the $40 stipend, like we would offer the option to others as well.
Councilmember Siemens, is that an old hand or a new hand? Old, okay. So I'll weigh in. I'll say other than figuring out what we're gonna do with the youth council, I do like doing it across the board with as many as we can groups, and I'd be okay if to go ahead with Councilmember Siemens to make it $30, or if the committee thinks the $40 is appropriate, I'm good with that as well.
So it does sound like that, Mayor, what you've just outlined is actually a decision point that would be helpful if we can just kind of fill everyone out. So it sounds like everyone is on board with doing something for everyone, right? So I think I hear consensus there, and not limiting whatever we do to the quasi judicial and the regulatory bodies. Is that correct? Okay, I'm gonna take that as a yes. So the next decision before us is the $30 or the $40. So are there, I heard Councilmember Siemens being okay with 30. I heard the mayor is okay with 30. I can go either way. I'm fine with 30. Are there others on the council that feel strongly on 30 versus 40?
I could probably go either way, but I would say if there's question from folks with regard to the reimbursement, if there's not an interest in doing the reimbursement, if we're doing the 40, and I'm not sure where people fall on that, I would support. I would rather see the reimbursement with a $30 per meeting stipend than a $40 stipend and no reimbursement, if that makes sense to folks. I don't know how people are feeling about the reimbursement component, and I actually think we probably should get some estimates on what we think that might be, and what parameters that might involve, maybe before next week, to kind of finalize our plans on that, if that's something we want to do.
Yeah, I think that's another decision point that we haven't discussed yet. So I kind of don't want to take us too fast. So the other point that Councilmember Costick is referring to is, at one point there was a point raised about whether or not we could offer reimbursement for childcare and transportation. And so one of the things that we wanted to hear from you all about, I know that when we talked before, the question was, an implementation one, in terms of we could offer the stipend the same across everyone, and we could deal with childcare and transportation reimbursements. And so I know that it seemed like there was general consensus around giving the stipend, but I don't know if how folks might have felt, or maybe we need to bring more information to you all around the reimbursement, in terms of what would be an appropriate amount, how much, should that be in lieu of a stipend or in addition to a stipend? But it did sound like the last time we spoke that everyone was for the most part, in agreement around a stipend structure. But I'll be quiet and see if others on the subcommittee have anything to add.
Yeah, I last week, 2 weeks ago, the city clerk offered the thought that reimbursement for childcare and or transportation would not, in her experience, knowing many of these people, would not be a large number of people, and therefore not a large dollar amount, not the kind of dollars we're talking about for the stipends. So for whatever it's worth, that's why we didn't try to quantify that. Is it 1 or 2 people per committee that have childcare needs? Is it $10 an hour for 3 hours? It doesn't add up to the kind of numbers that the stipends do. We can try it, but that was the thought. And last time we talked about this, the thought was that for those folks who need it, it would be in addition to the stipend. The stipend is not for expenses. The stipend is an honorarium, if you will, for thanking people for their service, appreciating everyone for their service to the city. So that's the way we were framing it the last time round, for whatever that's worth. On the stipends, I could go either way, but I lean pretty strongly toward, if the experience of other communities is that they're only starting at 40, I would wonder whether 30 would really not have the intended effect.
I thought I saw Councilman Costick. Oh, no. The city clerk has her hand up.
Yeah, I apologize. Maybe the group, we didn't talk about lately the reimbursements and the stipends, but perhaps I don't want to minimize the staff impact, the potential staff workload with doing, I think it's pretty minimal with doing stipends. I think it becomes slightly more with doing reimbursements, but we would need to figure out how it works. But I just throw that out there, that we're talking about the actual dollar amount that we'll be providing to people, but then we also need to think about the amount of time for staff that might be involved. I just throw that into the mix in your thinking.
And so I guess to the city clerk's point, would we be in a position to offer optional childcare transportation reimbursements in this first round of October? And if that workload is going to be a little too much for right now, then we can put this particular piece in the parking lot for something that we want to do once we get the committees, once we get everyone stood up, and then we could advertise that we're offering stipends for participation. Does that make sense? So if it's going to take more time for us to figure out the childcare and the transportation, and given that we're trying to start marketing in August to get folks stood up by October, and the stipend could potentially be a draw for people, I would say for right now, we stick with making sure that we can get the stipend amounts stood up and get that implemented. And then we work towards getting the childcare transportation reimbursement logistics thought through for later, after we kind of get everything stood up. Do folks on council feel strongly about the need for us to move forward with the childcare and transportation reimbursement by, I guess, September in order to advertise it?
I think it might be hard. I would like to explore it, and I think we should think about the system we put in place, because I'm not sure taking the need now or the questions we get now is a good predictor of what we could have, because we don't offer it now. And the hope is by offering it now, we're attracting more people who do need it. So if it stays the same, then there's no point in doing it. I kind of feel like, so I would say, I think our hope is that more people would join committees and be able to use it. So I think we need to have a good system in place in order to do this, because I also don't want people to get frustrated to join a committee, and for their first experience, because we don't have everything in place yet, to get frustrated about this. And I will say that this is probably going to take our finance department some time, and the summer is when they do the audit. So I just wanted to kind of flag the, what our finance department is probably working on right now, and how much time they would have to commit to putting something in place.
Yeah.
So while I'm fully committed to doing this, it does worry me to try and do it within a month. Councilman Kostick?
So I completely agree with the concerns. And maybe there's a way for us to offer it, but sort of let people know it's a pilot and we're still in the process of developing it, or we need people's help in developing what this looks like. But I do think I would like to see the reimbursement, because I do think it helps us support members who want to join committees who we haven't traditionally had on committees as much. And I think it also it provides that additional above and beyond. I don't feel like if everyone is sort of getting a baseline stipend, but some of those people have this extra expense to have childcare, or they want to take a Lyft or an Uber home because they don't feel comfortable walking or waiting for the bus late at night. Sometimes these things end somewhat late at night, or and they live farther away, and we want to attract people who aren't within walking distance of the community center or wherever we are. I do think there's value in having that option, and to make people know that there's that provision in place. So I would like to see it, and if there's a way that we can do it to kind of recognize some of the barriers we have in instituting it, maybe we can kind of find a balance there.
It occurs to me from an implementation point of view that based on what we outlined the last time, that folks get appointed, they come to the orientation. At the orientation, they decide whether they want to accept the stipend, whether they might be a candidate for future reimbursements for childcare and transportation. By the time we do all of that, we are well into October, if not November. So we have a little more than we can. I feel that if we make a commitment tonight to offer both of these, that the systems to be in place to actually put the money out the door, we have a little bit of time there. It doesn't all have to be set up by Labor Day. That's my interpretation. of how this might actually play out in real time. I like the idea of offering the reimbursement for childcare and transportation, and I don't know, nobody knows, but I'm not thinking it's going to be in the same league dollar wise as the other category of stipend.
Okay, so it sounds like that we will likely have, I guess, a two-stage approach. Bear with me as I talk through this. So the first is, it sounds like everyone is in agreement. We want to give either a $30 or a $40 stipend to everyone that volunteers to be on a board or commission. What we can do to kind of help folks with that final decision points is we can run the numbers that we're talking about, everyone, so everyone can understand. When we come back to you all, you'll see what the dollar amount would be based on all of the things we've worked through in terms of max participation in each of the groups that we're talking about, and what $30 looks like, what $40 looks like, and how much we're talking. And then that way that can help folks with making that final decision regarding the $30 or the $40, because we're basing it on all. It sounds like we should be able to market that we will be offering a stipend, and that during the intake process, like as folks are participating in some of these orientation meetings, we might be able to get information from people about whether or not transportation or childcare is something they're going to need. Not saying we're immediately going to be able to provide a reimbursement, but at least we will be able to gather some information around how many folks we're talking about. And that would also give the HR and giving our finance staff a little bit more time and understanding the capacity in which they may have to offer those reimbursements. So we can make sure that we put in that, that they may be available. And so then that way we can really understand whether or not what's the need for, things like childcare and transportation reimbursement, while figuring out how to come up with that reimbursement structure. Because I understand it's a lot easier to just cut everyone the same check than it is to get a receipt, have people submit the receipts, fill out the forms, and then cut them a check. Does that sound like a game plan for folks? Okay, awesome. On to the next one. Okay. All right, so another decision that we need to have made is just making sure that we have a discussion around the specific committees that we're recommending to be discontinued or revised. So just to remind everyone, I see Peter's hand is already up. Personnel Appeals Board, Facade Advisory Board, Complete Safe Streets, discontinue and can consider a future task force. Committee on the Environment, reconstitute under Sustainable Maryland Green Team, Commemoration Committee, Commission, and the Nuclear Free Committee. Any thoughts? Peter, take it away.
Thank you. And I'd say, first off, I really appreciate all the work that the working group has done over the last several months. And it's a big, big job. And over the years, through kind of accretion, these various committees have formed up, and they were never really all considered in a comprehensive way as they have been here. So I really appreciate that. And I agree with all the process reforms that we've talked about. And I agree with most of the recommendations for the status of the various panels going into the future. And there's really two where I have a difference of opinion, I think. And so I'll just explain that. I had a brief conversation with Councilmember Duvall about it earlier today, so it won't be a surprise to her. I don't know about anyone else. But in any case, the two I'm thinking about are the Committee on the Environment and the Nuclear Free Committee. So with the Committee on the Environment, the one other thing I think is missing for us is help in implementation of our climate framework. And that got slowed, as some other things did during our COVID period, and we're emerging out of that. And I hope when we begin meeting in person again, and we're kind of more back to normal in the fall, that we'll get back into a lot of the climate change pieces. But I think it could be really useful to have a committee devoted to that. And it struck me that if they are going to be doing the work that's suggested here to maintain and periodically get recertified our Sustainable Maryland status, the way they're going to do that and the things they're going to recommend to enable us to continue adding to our sustainability records such that we can continue to qualify for that certification, those things are going to be implementation of items that we have in our climate framework. And they're not going to recommend things that aren't in that, because that is our roadmap for moving forward on climate change. So it just seems to me that those two things kind of dovetail, and we could fairly easily just say that their mission is working on the Sustainable Maryland, as a Sustainable Maryland Green Team, to aid in implementation of the climate framework. And then that would, to me, combine those two things well. And then the other one that I refer to as a nuclear free committee, and I would be okay keeping it in its current status, but I think that there's another missing piece that does actually connect in a way to the climate change as well, which is we've talked a lot about the need to get an alternative to our current banking and financial systems here in the city, and to ideally develop a relationship with a banking or financial institution that doesn't have investments and otherwise contribute to the nuclear weapons industry, to use that term. And I think we've also talked about in the climate framework wanting to move toward a fossil fuel free FFF.
I sent you a text.
Fossil fuel free banking and financial system. And so what I'd like to have us consider is repurposing the Nuclear Free Committee and or having a separate task force that could do this to really delve into that banking situation. Because I think what we found over the last few years, and actually one of the public commenters mentioned it tonight, what we found is that despite a lot of interest and a lot of goodwill on the part of staff and council, we haven't been able to really crack the nut on that one and really get into it. And so I think if we had a separate group of people with some financial experts in there too, who could look at, I mentioned this previously, look at, say, what some other communities have done, what are the best practices in that, and then come back with some recommendations. Because to be totally honest about it, if we don't have that and it's just up to us to put it in our priorities again, and we're going to have a new city manager starting soon, it's just not going to happen. The bandwidth required is too much. We've seen that. And so I think that type of repurposing on both those points together, the nuclear weapons piece and the fossil fuel free finances, would be a great way to move forward and still have a group that's working on this. Whether it's a task force or named committee, I think is less important to me. So those are my two suggested changes.
I want to just, and I think this is what I heard Councilmember Kovar say on the Nuclear Free Committee. I 100% agree. We should have, I believe it's a task force really focused on investment. We're right. We've taken a long time on this. We were able to get a pro bono consultant who came in, was able to help start us with this. But it is a huge undertaking, and we don't have the staff capacity in the finance department to really undertake this. And we need I think a dedicated group of residents and some who have financial expertise and maybe even have expertise in the area of sustainable investments and other things to provide support. So I'd be okay with discontinuing the committee and creating a task force with that specific purpose, on the Committee on the Environment. I have voiced my concerns that the Sustainable Maryland Green Team seems a bit big to me. If that was the task and mission of the committee was narrowed down, I would be more amenable to reconstituting it and continuing it. And I would like the advice or input of our sustainability manager regarding Councilmember Kovar's other recommendation. But otherwise, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. We, so, and Councilmember Dabala, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm misremembering something, because I feel like I spend every minute of my day in a meeting talking about something. But I do recall that we met with our sustainability manager. And this is actually a recommendation that she made in terms of the structure. We did talk about, the framework and how that would work. And one of the things, and Councilmember Dabala, definitely correct me if I'm wrong, if I remember correctly, she had suggested that there may be parts of that framework that would perhaps work a little better as a task force kind of approach, and to use the standing committee under the idea of the Sustainable Maryland Green Team, because this is something that we have to do over time and it kind of doesn't change as much. So we would kind of need to do it. So it gives a more long-standing structure. Whereas with the framework, once we kind of have a couple of groups, or she may have some experts in the community that she would want to consult. But she also had noted that she wanted to also get out of the realm of just talking to the experts in the community. But part of the issue with the framework is making sure that she could reach broader and get input from a broader group of residents and businesses alike. So I think that there was a desire for the standing committee have it a little bit more focused on the Sustainable Maryland Green Team, but for the framework, kind of take a little different approach that would be either broader in the community or identifying those experts within the community to help with developing the specific aspects of implementation. So that was something that we talked about. We could definitely follow up with her again, and definitely Councilmember Dabala, please correct me if I'm misremembering something.
Yeah, that's about right. If you want to think about it, back in the beginning, we said there were many different ways to get input. The standing committee is just one of them. What's the standing committee need? So coordinating and helping to document Sustainable Maryland was Green Team Actions was the suggestion for the standing committee from the sustainability manager, because it's an ongoing function, because it's related to something we must do if we're going to continue our certification. We need the resident piece of the Green Team, and we're the other piece of the Green Team. So that's where that came from. The current language, I think, does focus in on documenting and coordinating and not allowing any project anywhere at any time that you could claim could be Sustainable Maryland and you want to do. We clearly don't want that. We want the former. And she had gone so far as to make a list of duties and responsibilities to help shape that. So that's sort of one need. Another need is a very real need for technical working group kind of expertise from the community to help shape the details of the framework. And then a third need, as Councilmember Searcy said, is to get the broader perspective, get out of the box of folks who are concerned about climate number one. Not that that's a bad box to be in, but that to reach a broader audience. That might not be a committee or a task force or a working group at all. That might look very much like something different. So then how to shape this in practice and in code. So our suggestion had been to go with a standing committee that scales down from the broad mandate of what we have now and focuses on one part of it, which is the Sustainable Maryland, and to work through a working group or a task force, a technical task force to do the climate framework stuff, not to try to mix them. It could be you could mix them if you had the understanding that you weren't trying to do that third piece at the same time, that broader outreach for the climate programs. You could, but let's see what the sustainability manager says about trying to merge the more technical climate needs with the sustainable Maryland Green Team. I looked after I talked to Councilmember Kovar, and the climate actions on the Green Team are broad enough that they really wouldn't shape what the city might or might not do in the framework. The framework is much more specific than what's in the broader categories of the Sustainable Maryland program, if that helps anybody any. So I don't, for me, it's not so much, do we have a standing Green Team? My question is more, can we bite off recruiting for that now on top of all the other groups? What are the consequences if we put that to the winter? So just to throw in another piece that I'm thinking about is if we're going out now to identify a range of folks for the different groups, is this the time to put the Green Team on the table, assuming we all agree we should have a group that's focused on that? Where does that leave us? So on nuclear free, Councilmember Searcy, do you want to just go through the last three and see where we are with people?
Well, I see Councilmember Kovar's hand is raised.
Oh, okay. I didn't see if anybody else had something to say.
No worries.
Just to follow very briefly, and then I'll let it go on the Committee on the Environment for now. To me, we've got these two things that need to be done, and both spool out over a period of time. The Maryland Sustainability Certification gets redone every several years, but there's a lot of work in between that leads up to it. So you got to have some continuity there. The Climate Change Task Force, or the Climate Change Framework, we've set ourselves goals basically from now over a period of 10 years or so. So that's also an ongoing task. I think when it comes to this question, and I think it could be really, really helpful for the sustainability manager to be able to tap into the expertise that exists in the community. It's kind of unbelievable that we have so many experts, but we can't, as I understand it, create this advisory panel and then just say, but Gina Mathias is just going to talk to them. If they're an official advisory panel, then they have to meet, then they have to have minutes, and they have to have all this process. I would much prefer to say, Gina can talk to any of those people whenever she wants, when she needs something. We should do something to ensure that we get the certification. But I think just as with the banking piece, we need help and will need help on implementation of the climate framework. And I think, to me, a group of people that we can, in effect, assign tasks to help us do that really does make sense. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think one other thing that the sustainability manager brought up was trying to, the purpose and how you market a committee will actually determine who participates. And if you are trying to make sure that you have diverse participation of people across all race, ethnicities, background, education levels, if we make a committee very specialized in terms of the expertise, then that's what you're going to get, right? And that may be perfectly fine. That may be exactly what we're looking for the purpose of this group. But one of the things that we were trying to think about, and one of the things that the Sustainable Maryland Green Team does, is it opens it up a little bit more. So you may have people who are interested in gardening that now they're not an environmentalist, they don't do it as their day job, but that's a part of the Sustainable Maryland Green Team. So yes, I will volunteer for that. So that's something else that we were trying to trying to think about in terms of trying to think through the scope so that there wouldn't be as many hard, fast environmentalists, and we can kind of broaden up the participation to some folks who may be interested in other aspects of sustainability.
Yes, well put. Thank you.
So I want to make sure, because I know that we're going long, and I just want to make sure that we're at a point now where we have made our decisions. So it doesn't sound like we're hearing pushback on the Personnel Appeals Board or the Facade Advisory Board or the Complete Safe Streets Committee. It sounds like we need to follow up with our sustainability manager to talk through and think through how we ultimately would want to reconstitute the sustainable, the Committee on the Environment as the Sustainable Greens, Maryland Green Team, but how we can loop in or kind of tag on and really focus that to not be all of Sustainable Maryland, but the aspects that relate to perhaps our sustainability framework activities. It sounds like there's folks are okay with us moving forward on the Commemoration Commission, but it sounds like in terms of the Nuclear Free Committee, folks are okay with us discontinuing the standing committee, but forming a task force that is focused primarily on sustainable banking and helping provide us with some technical expertise on how we can deal with funding and our banking structure such that is we're investing in sustainable green banks and making that transition. Subgroup members, have I missed anything? Are we good? Okay.
The only thing I want to say is one of timing, is again the question of what groups we might or might not be recruiting for in this initial blush. So we would not be trying to recruit for the Nuclear Free Committee or the Commemoration Commission. As we just said, we're still trying to sort out the Committee on the Environment. And the question of the timing of a Sustainable Investment Task Force. We have one meeting left in July. I'm having a little heartburn trying to see how we add that to the list for September. But maybe I'm just not thinking clear.
I would say the way we constitute task force are different than committees. It doesn't go in the code. The way we do task force are by individual resolution, and we establish the objectives, criteria, and other things. And so I don't believe we're not going to do it in one meeting. And I think that might be something that we can work on to bring back in September.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that. I wasn't.
Unless the city attorney has a different point of view, because I saw him turn on his video.
No, Mayor, I do not.
Okay.
All right.
Cool. Anything else?
Before I stop sharing my screen.
All right.
All right. Awesome.
Great. Anything else from the subcommittee on committees? No? All right. Thank you very much for that. We look forward to continuing to work on this. To find my agenda. All right. Next is a discussion of the continuation of Laurel Avenue Streetery. Ms. Grisby, like you've been sitting through a lot tonight to get to this one. All right. You want to walk us through it?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Rosalind Grigsby, Community Development Manager. We're talking about public space. Let me share my screen. Can you see the PowerPoint presentation? Mm-hmm. Okay, so. Sorry, I have things blocking how to do this now. Oops. Sorry about that. All right. So we're talking about public space. You all might need kind of a 10th inning stretch right now, but I will be succinct. In 2020, Council passed 2 resolutions regarding the use of public space called Supporting Small Businesses and Advancing Public Health by allowing the use of public and private space for outdoor seating, sales, and customer pickup. The resolutions allow for modification of existing spaces, particularly sidewalks, roads, and parking spots, to assist Tacoma Park's businesses, employees, and residents during the COVID-19 pandemic. The most recent resolution expires September 30th this year. The measure is in addition to the existing program that allows businesses to apply for public space directly in front of their businesses. That's through the outdoor cafe seating permit. So just didn't want to confuse things on that. As part of the resolutions, Council approved the closure of the northbound lane on Laurel Avenue, which allowed Tacoma Park businesses to function in the expanded outdoor space and created public community gathering space in compliance with county and state restrictions over the past year. The southbound lane of Laurel heading into DC, the median, and the post office continued to operate as usual. There was no change in their functions. The community benefits that come from this initiative are numerous, actually. It increases usable public space. The closure of one side of Laurel repurposes public space that was devoted to parking and travel lanes, and that's now used by the public in a variety of ways. The street closure allows for pedestrian-focused experience, highlighting the businesses that may not be noticed when someone is just driving by, so it increases visibility and access. It provides space for informal and for programmed gatherings. The space has been used for friends to meet up, for an occasional yoga class, for music performances and children's activities. It enhances safety for pedestrians and bicyclists. The closure of the northbound lane on Laurel led to an observable increase in pedestrian and biking in the public space. And the feedback survey that we did late in 2020 indicates many people now walk to the area. It allows for flexibility as circumstances change. We continue to see the public health circumstances change on a regular basis, and the capacity to use this space with flexibility in creative ways continues to be essential for the community. And it supports businesses, the Old Tacoma Business Association, and the Tacoma Park Seventh-day Adventist Church there. The survival of the businesses ensures continued employment, maintains the value of commercial areas, allows for payment of rent and taxes, enhances circulation of the money in the local economy. We anticipate no additional costs from continuing the program. As you know, the restaurants have invested significantly in tables, chairs, tents, even during cold weather, in outdoor heaters to enable the use of the spaces. And the survival of the businesses feeds back into the vitality of the community in many ways. The first resolution, 2020-13, was passed in June of 2020 with a sunset clause, meaning the expanded use of public space, including Laurel Avenue, was set to expire December 31st. Resolution 2020-28 was passed in December and set to expire, as I said, in September. And so the new resolution in front of you proposes an annual renewal with the option for council to look at changing that as we go along. So the question really is what happens next, and what direction does council choose to go here? The resolution you have has an automatic renewal on January 1st of each year for a period of 12 months, unless the council provides notice of renewal, notice of intent to discontinue by July of the previous year. The arrangement mirrors the agreement that the city has with the Tacoma Park Farmers Market, which has an annual automatically renewing contract with the city. and has operated successfully in this manner and largely on Laurel Avenue for decades. The intent is to give businesses enough lead time and confidence in the planning process to be able to invest wisely as they are moving forward, especially for winter operations, which obviously come with significant costs in outdoor heating and lights and various needs to enable people to use the space in cold weather. By providing certainty to businesses, the resolution enables them to invest in the time frame needed for them to move forward. So really, it's a question of how council wants to move forward on this space now. We're in front of you tonight because we didn't want to wait until September, knowing your agenda is full and that gives very little time for businesses if there is a change expected. So I'm happy to answer questions and get your feedback.
Great, thank you very much. Councilmember Smith.
Ms. Crisby, thank you for the presentation. It seems like the local businesses appreciate what the Streetery has done for them. Can you tell us if there's any feedback from residents that live immediately around the Streetery, and what are they saying? Because I think before we considered this closure, that there were a lot of residents that were concerned.
Yeah, yes, happy to. As you recall, we had done a specific feedback survey late last year. I think it ran until November. And those results are available on the city website. Oh, which, sorry, I had one last slide with the website. I promised myself I would always end with the website where people can get more information. And so in that survey, what we found was that early on in June and July, when the changes were first taking place, it took people a little while to get used to it. But from September on, the feedback that we got was overwhelmingly positive. And I just have a few numbers in front of me from the survey. 90% of respondents indicated that people were practicing social distancing, that it was working as intended in that public space. 95% said they felt safe, and 95% were supportive of the closure. There were also a number of write-in comments where people spontaneously said, make this permanent. And there were also a number that said, close both sides. And so staff has looked at that, but of course it's more complicated. Circling traffic around the church with a lot of left-hand turns is a little more complicated. And so we didn't pursue that at this point, but we would certainly follow council direction if you chose to go that direction. So generally speaking, I think once the patterns were in place, the response was very positive. And I still find that now that the space is well used, that it provides a vibrancy, and people stop me and tell me that they wanted to stay. So that's anecdotally.
Well, thank you. Let me just say that I support the proposal before us. I would just ask that you would look at other parts of the city where we can do something similar. Thank you.
Councilman Kostick.
Thank you. I'll also add, since I represent the neighborhood right behind the businesses there, that I have heard very positive comments recently as well. I think there was some concern earlier on about traffic flow, and for the most part, it doesn't seem like there have been any issues with regard to that. So I'm supportive of this. I agree. I think it has activated the space in a really great way and provided a pedestrian opportunity for people who are visiting businesses, as well as people who are not and just want to hang out and spend time there. The one question I have as we just look towards the vote on this is if we can maybe just double check with the city attorney on what would happen if there were some type of emergency where we needed to close it for some, unusual circumstance outside of that kind of July to January circumstance and time frame. And I wouldn't anticipate that would ever happen. I just want to make sure that there's, there's a provision in place that doesn't limit the capacity to make a change if there's an emergency. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Kovar.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Grigsby. I appreciate the presentation. I support continuing the streetery also. As I have mentioned in the past, I think the things that I was concerned about, and concerned based on hearing from residents as well, all seem to have been resolved in, to me, an adequate way, and that includes parking for those who may be disabled, access to the post office, cut through traffic, and ensuring that there's public space for people who don't necessarily aren't necessarily patrons of the businesses there. And we've done all those things, and I think it's worked out pretty well. I agree to close off the other side of the street would add to the to traffic in a way that the current closure doesn't, and I think would be less desirable. So I think continuing this seems like a good idea. A couple of other points, though. The farmers market is a big part of this, and their ability to be in the parking lot behind has helped enable the whole thing to work and to take place. And I think there's some financial aspects of being able to have the market continue to use the parking lot behind that still have to be worked out. I think it would be worth just including the farmers market in some fashion, a reference to them, and I can submit something if you'd like before we vote on this, whenever that is, so that it's understood that they're part of the whole calculation in terms of how this would work. So I mentioned that. And then also there's this question of how to get the public space cleaned up. And, Chris Brown from Tacoma Bevco mentioned that his folks are doing that. I think there's been some waiver of the fees that people pay for access to the space because of COVID. And so that may change, and maybe that could mean that there should be a more formal written thing that would apply to the ongoing cleanup of the public area. That's just something I toss out there. But one other point, and this relates to what Councilmember Smith said, I do think that there are other areas in the city that we should potentially provide the same type of benefit. However, I also think that there are other places in the city where it can't be done, either because there are state highways or other road configurations that wouldn't really enable something like the streetery to work. And so to me, I don't think that means don't do the streetery, but I also think it shouldn't mean so therefore those businesses don't get anything. So I think, and again, this could be part of the ARPA piece that we get more into in the fall, we ought to really drill down a little bit more on what can we do that may help businesses who really couldn't, because of physical or other aspects or road ownership, do something like the streetery that can help them benefit in other ways. So I don't know what that is, but I think we should have that be part of what we look at in terms of ARPA. And I would say it is in line with our strategic plan on economic development to try to help small businesses in that fashion. So one other thing for us to think about. Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar, may I just ask for clarification on what it is you would want included regarding farmers market?
Well, let me come up with something on that. I guess all I'm saying is they're part of their status and their need to find that other space is part of what makes this whole thing work. And so I think if we want them to continue that, which I think we do, their concerns or considerations should be just built into the resolution we will potentially adopt here to do the extension. That's what I'm saying. I haven't thought through the things that. And then also, why July 1st? That seems, is that just to give people a real understanding 6 months ahead that would be the time, as opposed to like 3 months ahead? Doesn't seem like enough. Is that the basic idea?
Now is actually the time when they would be ordering things for winter.
Okay, I see. Okay, all right. Thank you.
Councilman Searcy.
Thank you so much, Ms. Grigsby. I love the streetery. I think it's a fabulous way to not only help the businesses during the pandemic when, you know, our storefronts, quite frankly, are quite tight and quite small, which makes it very difficult to have the necessary distancing in place and provide service. So I love what you all and what your team has been able to do. I agree with Councilmember Kovar. I think, you know, we will need to figure out a way to make the farmers market whole, because that is also a draw. Like it's a mutually beneficial exchange to be able to have the businesses to be able to occupy that space, but also the farmers market in and of itself brings more patrons to that area. So, you know, for one group to experience a hardship for the benefit of another group, just to me, just doesn't seem right. So if there's a way for us to try to figure out how to, and I don't know if it's in this particular resolution or something else, but if there's a way for us to figure out how to address that space need so that the farmers market isn't incurring additional costs as a result of providing this public benefit, quite frankly, I think is important. I also, you know, would love to have something similar in Ward 6. You know, I understand the limitations of space and just configuration, but I think that, you know, one of the things what we'll need to do is really try to work in creative ways with partners, particularly in a Crossroads, to try to figure out ways for us to kind of activate some of the sidewalk spaces along Holton Lane and the like to provide more of an outdoor experience for patrons there as well. But I think this is a great pilot turned into something, I hope, fingers crossed, permanent, because I think it does provide a valuable use of public space for businesses and residents alike. So thank you for working on this.
Thank you. I should also just add that in cooperation with the city's economic development manager, Samira Cook Gaines, we've been looking at 6530 New Hampshire Avenue and 6600 New Hampshire, and looking at making a little streetery type space there with some additional public amenities like seating and perhaps, you know, lighting and things like that. So not exactly sure where that stands now. I don't think we've gotten anything delivered yet, but we have looked at other parts of the city and where there might be ways to squeeze in additional space.
Awesome, thank you.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Ms. Grisby, for not just this presentation, but for all the work on the streetery. It is overwhelming success, I think. I go by there and I'm really impressed every time I pass through there at how busy the area is. And maybe no more clients than they used to have, but it sure does make it a vibrant area to have so much activity going on there. I obviously support this. I wanted to just voice my agreement with Councilmember Smith and Mr. Kovar and Councilman Searcy, that it would be nice if we could see other ideas in other parts of the city for the businesses, and not necessarily outside seating and not necessarily just restaurants, but you know, what can we do to help ease their life through this difficult time? And I'm confident that that you and Ms. Gaines Cook are working on that, but I fully support that work. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just say ditto to what has been said before. And, you know, I do think it would be interesting as we get this in place to look at, you know, maybe some studies and the potential of closing the other side of Laurel Avenue. But I would, you know, put a priority on looking at other places in the city where we could expand these type of things. I will say I just met with some folks, moms who live on Maple Avenue in the apartments. And one of the things they mentioned was having some kind of more of an outdoor space to be able to gather, have kids play, and other things. So I know that we don't have a lot of public space necessarily, but in that area, but it might be interesting to think about what are some things we may be able to do in partnership with some of the apartment buildings there. So great. All right, I think we're good on that one. And so our last, it'll come back to us for a vote next week. And our last item tonight is an update on recruitment for the youth council. I don't know if the city clerk wants to provide any quick update on that.
Sure. Well, the quick update is that we had a very successful recruitment for the youth council this year, thanks to Donna Wright, I believe. And we have 24 applicants for the 11 available seats. And so the applications have been sent out to the council and for review. And Mayor Stewart, I believe that we'll be getting recommendations from each of the wards, and then we'll be taking a look at the big picture and coming up with a list this weekend or Monday to share with the city council in terms of recommendations for making the appointments.
Cool. Anyone have any questions? Yes, Councilman Devala.
So recommendations from each of the wards, does that assume that each ward gets an equal representation, which no. Okay, so say that again.
So that's the challenge.
What do you need from us? What do you need from us to move ahead with a recommended list from you that's shorter than the list that we have now?
Sure. So what we're hoping to get was your recommendation for appointments from your ward, but recognizing it, recommend up to 3 to be appointed, but recognizing that not, there obviously can't be 3 from every ward because there could only be 11 altogether. So we'll take a look at the recommendations and the makeup of the youth council over the potential makeup overall, and then get back to council with a recommended list.
Okay. The other thing that
from your feedback.
Thank you. The other thing that had come up was that some of these candidates, who, especially those who are 16 and over, might be very interested in participating in, since they can't all be on the youth council, some of them might be interested and suitable to participate in another city committee.
Mm-hmm.
So as we individually review our lists, we might think about that.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right, that was our last item. Next week, remember, is our last meeting. And so we have a number of things on our agenda. But it's our last meeting for the month of August. And remember, if there is any type of emergency or anything, we always can come back into session to address that. So I think that is it this evening. Thank you everyone for your work tonight. And we'll continue. So good evening, we're adjourned.